Let's start our meeting. Can we have a roll call, please? Staff?
Yes, Chair Balte,
Present?
Vice Chair Thompson,
Present.
Board Member Hirsch,
Present.
Board Member Lee,
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Oral communications. Is there any members of the public who wish to speak to any item not on our agenda today? Vin, do we have any speakers?
At this time, there are no raised hands.
Thank you very much. Next item is city official reports. The ARB meeting schedule and attendance record, tentative future agenda items, and recent project decisions. Jody, can we have a report, please?
Yes, so I think Veronica's helping us this morning. Did I get that right? And let's see, we have the yearly agenda here, just showing that we're going to continue to be virtual at least until February for sure. And we do have items for all of these hearings. On the next page, it should show our future items. So we do have 3585 El Camino, which it will be a third hearing for that small mixed use project. We also have 3241 Park Boulevard. This is going to be its first hearing, and that is a office project along the creek in the North Ventura area. Lastly, we were thinking that we might have elections on December 3rd, but after discussions with the chair, we agree that we're not going to know who is reappointed at that time. And so we will delay that until at least the December 17th hearing. No further change.
Before we leave this topic, I'd like to request, at least for myself, to have paper copies of these two projects coming up rather than the ones online. Are there any other members of the board who would like to make the same request?
Yes, I would, David Hirsch.
I appreciate paper as well, though feel badly about the printing.
It's too bad about the printing, but it made such a difference the other day when we had paper copies. So at least 3 members, Jody, are requesting paper copies of plans for those projects, okay?
Board Member Thompson and Lou, are you specifically not wanting paper?
So it doesn't matter to me. So if it's easier just to do all the board members, like have all the board members get paper, I'm fine with that.
I'm in the same position as Board Member Lou.
Okay, so I'll talk to support staff and see what works best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Then we move on to our action items. The first item is action item number 2, a public hearing quasi-judicial, 744, 748 San Antonio Road, recommendation on a master sign program to allow 2 freestanding signs, 8 wall signs, and ancillary window signs and a sign exception to exceed the number of freestanding signs and the size of freestanding signs and certain wall signs on a building facade, a building face. Do we have any, before we get started, do we have any disclosures to make? David, disclosures?
No disclosures.
Osma, disclosures?
No disclosures.
Grace, disclosures?
No disclosures.
Alex, disclosures?
Yes, I have a disclosure to make. So I did have to take a call from Randy Pop on Tuesday, who asked me if the drawings and the materials were clear. And I told him that I thought the drawings were fine, but that I had not reviewed the materials sample. But I did get to the samples yesterday. And I also visited the site yesterday as well.
Thank you, Alex. I'd like to disclose that I also visited the site yesterday, and I also looked at the material sample board out for the City Hall earlier this week. Okay, with that, staff, can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, hello, I'm Sheldon Osing. I just want to do a check here what screen's being shared because I'm getting a little confused here. What is the group seeing?
We're seeing a 744 San Antonio Road slide. The first one, it seems.
It's just not in presentation mode yet.
Okay, yeah, I've 3 monitors, and it's a different setup here. Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
Really great, thanks. So 744 San Antonio Road, thank you for the introduction, and the applicant is here with their presentation as well. So just a little bit of a context here as a formal review of a master sign program. It's located on 1.91 acres. It contains the construction site right now of 2 5-story hotels. It's zone CS. Just a little bit of context about the area. It's directly across the street from some residential, multifamily residential. San Antonio Road is a truck route. It's a divided road. Does also include right now some lower intensity types of commercial uses, including a nursery, gas station, there's a little grocery mart, and just approved this past Monday was the new mixed use project. It's a block away, and then the council did also approve the expansion of the housing incentive program. So this will be an area potentially in transition over the next several years. The request for this project is a master sign program as well as a sign exception, and we are recommending approval of the project. So the master sign program does include for 2 hotels. There's the AC Hotel, and that's on the southern portion of the property. And then there's what was, you guys may remember, it was the Courtyard brand of Marriott. Now it's the Hotel Citrine. That's it's kind of a one-off type of brand within the Tribute portfolio. I think the applicant will be able to explain that a little bit more. So it's slightly different. Both are kind of the luxury end, I would say. Each sign program includes kind of a mirroring of each other. So each site, each hotel includes 1 freestanding sign in front of it along San Antonio Road, 4 wall signs that are in very similar areas, as well as 4 window signs. So the first thing we'll look at is the AC Hotel, and on the west elevation is the front elevation. We're able to get some construction photos to provide a little bit better color context there for the signs. But this is sign A, and this is halo lit channel letters on the wall, and this is letters that in frame are brushed aluminum material, and this is about 41 square feet. This sign does comply with the sign code. So you can see the location of the sign there, the material has been placed into the building backdrop of it. Along the north interior, it's the same sign, but this is facing the other building. This is essentially the courtyard of the site. This is sign B. These are, again, halo lit channel letters. So the light is emitted from behind, with the lettering, the copy being the silhouette. This is 41 square feet again, and this sign also complies with the sign code. So along the same elevation here, but a different plane, you have 2 types of signs here. You have another wall sign. It's a non-illuminated, brushed aluminum frame and copy, and flat aluminum background. It's just under 4 square feet. So this is just where the entry to the building is. And this sign also complies with the sign code. So that's the sign that you see is on the left. And then on the right are the window decals that go on the doors. So this is a 3M film. It's in total, all of these film decals are 15 square feet, and the sign also complies with the sign code. On the north interior is one more sign. This is on top of the canopy. This is sign K, and it's actually mounted on top of the canopy. It has a facelit illumination, so it's a little bit different. So light comes through the front of the sign. It has an acrylic face with a vinyl applied to have that color. And then this is just over 6 square feet, and this sign also complies with the sign code. And lastly, for the AC Hotel, you have the freestanding sign, and this is sign E. It's mounted to a wall that's going to be 42 inches tall. It's not constructed yet. It's a stacked copy. It includes the first stacked copy. The AC Hotel will be halo illuminated, And then the secondary letters below are dimensional letters that are painted white and they're non-illuminated. And this is 175 square feet, and it does seem bigger. It's because where we count the sign area for freestanding signs, the entire background. So since it's placed on a wall, we do count that, but the sign itself isn't extraordinarily large at all. I think if you just draw a box around it, it's about 9 square feet, but we do count the entire wall in this case. Moving on to the Hotel Citrine. This is the San Antonio frontage. They had a lot of construction activity, so it's a little difficult to get closer there. But this is sign H, and this is a freestanding sign, pretty much identical wall, 42 inches high. It's again stacked copy. The first copy is halo illuminated, and then the dimensional letters are below, and those are painted white. This is 280 square feet, and this sign, along with the other sign that I mentioned, did not comply with the sign code. That's where the sign exceptions come into play. And I'll give a summary of compliance in a little bit. Then we get to the front of the building. This is again San Antonio. This is sign F. It's a stacked copy. Here we have a different type of sign. It's a cabinet internally illuminated. That's for the logo. It's 46 inches high by 27 inches high. And then we have the brushed bronze letters, and that's 136 square feet. And this sign does not comply with the sign code. It does exceed the area. We do have a little bit of concerns with the cabinet illumination because it's basically like a light box. We want to seek some direction from the board on this type of sign and whether this is appropriate and how to address that. We suggest in the staff report of having some kind of film to reduce light emissions. The applicant is also going to propose something in their presentation as well. On the south interior, this is facing the courtyard, facing the AC building. This is very similar sign. It's identical sign. You can see a little bit of the back material there being applied in this photo. So that gives a little bit of contrast of what that would look like. Again, it's the cabinet logo is 46 inches by 27 inches. And then the second copy is halo illuminated with brushed bronze letters. This is again 136 square feet, does not comply with this sign. And then also here we have sign I. This is very similar to the plaque that is on the AC hotel. It's non-illuminated. It has a mirror polished stainless steel border and letters and a flat aluminum background. This is just under 4 square feet. And this does comply with the sign code. Moving on here, we have the window vinyl, again, very similar to the AC hotel again. It's 15 square feet total when all those are applied to doors. And this in itself does comply with the sign code. And then the last sign is the sign that's on top of the canopy. This one's applied a little bit differently. It's not on top of the canopy. It's stacked in line with that canopy. It's a halo lit brushed bronze trimless face letters. So it's different than the other sign that was face lit, halo lit. And the brushed bronze returns. It also is just over 10 square feet. So with the materials, they're kind of similar, but they do share some of that brushed aluminum features, and there's also the bronze that's used. The applicant can explain a little bit more about those and how they're applied. Here we get into the sign code compliance, which is under Municipal Code 1620. So for freestanding signs, only one is allowed per site frontage. In this case, for freestanding signs under 5 feet, and the maximum size for signs under 5 feet in this situation is 27 square feet. So there are 2 signs that are proposed because they're trying to advertise 2 different brands, 2 different buildings, and the combined square footage is 455 square feet. So that exceeds the amount, and that's where we have to get into the sign exception. The wall signs here, not to exceed area indicated in table 3 of the ordinance. For each building face, the sign F exceeds the area allowed. Signs G, I, and L combined exceeds the area allowed along that building face plane for Hotel Citrine. Window size signs are not to exceed 20% of the window, and that does not exceed thresholds, so they're there. Then we have combination signs in section of code where there's a freestanding sign, any one of the following. We have a flat wall sign, projecting wall sign, or an awning sign. So in this case, the applicant is proposing a master sign program that will allow a different set of combination of signs. That's where that request comes from. So the master sign program does allow for occupants of building or project to include a number of buildings and combine their lawful sign area coverage into one or more lawful signs, an integrated design concept. So here, that's what the project's trying to do. The findings are, we can make those findings, and they're attachment B, packet page 21. There are 5 different findings for those. Sign exception is an application made in conjunction with the architectural review, which requests a deviation from what is allowed in the sign code. And so here, we're looking at if there are exceptional, extraordinary circumstances and conditions applicable to the property. And we're saying that here the sign exception findings can be made because the site includes hotel uses, which cater to visitors that are unfamiliar with the area. And but they may be familiar with the brand. And so that's why it's important to have the signs be situated where they are, and also a size that's consistent with the size of the buildings. Buildings are also larger. So in conclusion, for CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, these are exempt pursuant to accessory structures. Project meets the findings for a master sign program and sign exception, and staff seeks direction on the cabinet signs proposed. And we request that the ARB conduct a public hearing. For recommendation, staff does recommend that the ARB recommend approval of the proposed project to the Director of Planning, and based on the findings is subject to the Commission's approval. And that concludes my presentation. If you haven't answered any questions, speaking.
Thank you, Sheldon. Any questions from the board for staff? Sheldon, I have a question. And could you please pull up your slide number 6? I'd like to understand how you measure the area of this wall sign, please. Oh, I'm sorry, not that one. This, I'm sorry, go down further in your presentation. It's the citrine wall sign similar to that. So a few more slides down. This one right here, yes. How do you measure the area of that sign, please?
Yeah, I mean, we would take a rectangle around the area of the sign and what's behind it. So we, I think we took the area of the cabinet, and then we also took the area of the hotel citrine.
I see, and combined together, they come up to 136 square feet, you say?
Yes.
Okay, I don't measure it to be that, so maybe we can ask the applicant in more detail, or you?
Yeah, I can do, certainly the applicant, he does his presentation, I'll go through and kind of double check these.
Why don't you double check that for me if you could? Any other questions for staff? Okay.
Hey, Peter, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Sheldon. I think, if I recall correctly, that Palo Alto limits the signs to only allow like the trademark logo. And so I have a question about the freestanding signs. So one, like the AC Hotel includes Palo Alto, and the citrine includes a tribute collection below the logo, and I was wondering if those are allowed.
Let me double check that as Jody has.
Yeah, and I had looked into that a little bit. I'll find the wording for you. It is supposed to be the business name. And I believe I looked into that, and that was part of the full name, but we can ask the applicant to go over that as well, and I'll find that definition.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Any other questions? Then do we have the applicant with us this morning? Is that Randy Pop? Good morning, Randy. Let's give Randy a chance to tell us about his project.
Great, I'm unmuted now. Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you just fine. If you
Terrific,
could,
thank you.
Randy, you'll have 10 minutes to make your statement, please.
Great, and just before I start, I'd like to ask that you also allow Rashik Patel, who I believe is part of the audience, to come into the presentation group. He is going to speak briefly on behalf of the hotel.
Who is he first, please?
So Rashik Patel is his name. He is the Vice President of Development for T2 Hospitality, and they are the ownership group for the hotel.
Okay, Ben, if you could unmute him, please. Combined, you'll have 10 minutes whenever you're ready to start.
Let's just make sure we got the right person. I see. Okay, it looks like Sheik might be logged in as Rupetav, who is one of our construction site supervisors, but hopefully that's the right person. So we'll just make sure he's able to unmute.
Whatever you think is right, Andy.
Yeah, I'm good to go here whenever you guys want to.
I would like for him to spell his name
who's going
out
to
for
be.
the record when he speaks.
Let's go ahead and get him on. And can we bring up the presentation? I think Sheldon was going to put that on the screen for me.
Can we check that the person whose name is Rupesh is the person that you are wanting?
Yeah.
Maybe we can ask them to unmute.
We just, it sounds like we need to either ask them to unmute or we need to unmute them. One of the two, and they're waiting to speak.
So he's able to unmute himself.
Hello.
Okay.
I'm
Sorry
on
for the-
Rupesh Madhav's computer. This is Rashik Patel.
Rashid, if you could please state and spell your name for the record, and then Randy, you can put together your presentation.
Sure. My name is Rashik Patel, R-A-S-H-I-K, P-A-T-E-L. I'm the Vice President of Development for T2 Hospitality.
Welcome to our meeting. Whenever you're ready,
Great.
gentlemen.
I'm ready to get started. So Sheldon, go ahead and drop us into presentation mode. We'll go on here. All right. So I will just briefly thank Sheldon for an excellent presentation. I'm not sure that you really need to see my slides. He's done a great job of explaining what I was going to run through. So I'll be more rapid about what I'm doing and won't waste your time this morning. If we could go to the next slide. I'll just mention that today we are seeking a recommendation of approval from the ARB. We're close to finishing this project and are hoping to be open sometime in December if that's possible. This hearing is really only required because the project has two buildings. Similar to other campuses in town like VMware and other places, when you've got that, our sign requirements are not consistent with that type of development. They're more appropriate for a small shop on University Avenue, something like that. And so whenever you have a multi-building site, you have to contemplate this other version, which is the master sign program. And I believe, as Sheldon has stated pretty clearly, the signage is consistent with the requirements for that. While we're very sensitive to your review and want to participate in this process, I need to just state clearly that virtually all of what we're proposing is reflective of very specific brand standards. Things like the fact that the word Palo Alto is included in the name, that the Citrine logo includes Tribute Portfolio, are all any control over. And so with that, let me just let Rashik take a moment to explain how signage works for a brand like this and what their methodology has been to get these approved so far.
Good morning, board, and thank you for hearing us on the signage package here. The number one thing that Marriott drives its business with is consistency in all its brands. That is no different for the AC Hotel and the Tribute. There are almost 200 AC hotels worldwide and almost 90 in North America. The signage is how Marriott ensures that their guests will receive a level of service that is the same no matter where you go, anywhere in the world. Therefore, their process for the signage is simple. They all have to look the same with only two potential options, either a box sign or individual letters. If you want to deviate from that, then don't build a Marriott, choose another hotel franchise. This is how they ensure no matter what, that you go to one of their hotels, whether it be a Marriott or attribute that the level of service is guaranteed, and then it's the same. You get the same level of service, you get the same type of furniture, and the amenities are all alike. So that way Marriott can guarantee that you get the service that you have bought in on with their name behind it. And Marriott prides themselves on the fact that their consistency is their number one guarantee for their guests. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Thank you, Rashik. Sheldon, if you want to go to full screen, that might make it a little easier to see some of the detail. Just to make it a little bit larger, and then we can go to the next slide. I'll just relay that placeholders have been shown throughout the entitlement process for the signage. What was, as we've all heard previously, the Courtyard by Marriott has now been rebranded as the Hotel Citrine, which is part of the Tribute portfolio. This is actually a pretty exclusive brand. It's frankly lucky that we're able to get one in Palo Alto. It allows for a certain level of flexibility for the interior design, and it's based on an image or a concept that represents the character of the hotel itself. And so the citrine stone and the colors of that are used throughout the interior. And the lemon verbena, which is the branch that you see on the logo, represents an eco-centric aesthetic and approach to the operations. Next slide, please. So you can see how the building is shaping up here a little bit. Next slide. Same is true for the AC Hotel. Similarly, we've shown the placement of signage, and you can see the front-facing AC sign that's hidden a little bit by the foliage, and we anticipated that. The side-facing sign that was on the Courtyard, now the Citrine. Next slide, please. And the buildings are coming along nicely. I'm glad you were all able to get out there and walk around. We'd be happy to invite you out to come see the interior soon as well. Next slide, please. So as Sheldon mentioned, we do have 6 types of signs, which are really mirrored for each of the buildings. And I'll be frank in saying that the specifics for the AC standard have driven a bit of the design for the Citrine as well, where because they are mirrored next to each other, we want to have a compatibility between those two. Next slide, please. So as Rashik was mentioning, the brand standard is quite specific. You can see that, if you look just on the web briefly, you'll see all over the world, this is what the signs look like. They are typically an internally lit cabinet type sign for the AC that has a fairly high rating for the color, typically about a 5,000 Kelvin. And they're quite bright. We recognized in Palo Alto early on that was going to be challenging to do everywhere. So we have requested from Marriott some exception to that. Next slide, please. And so Sheldon did a great job explaining what the character of those will be. Sheldon, if you can flip to the next slide for me, that'd be great. Sheldon there. Sorry, it seems like the presentation is not advancing.
It's I'm trying here.
All right, that's fine. Yeah, you can just jump forward a couple of slides. The next slide is just our building again. You've seen these pictures in Sheldon, so we can go forward. And I'll just explain very briefly. I put in a couple images of one other AC that we were able to find that did halo lit letters similar to what we are proposing, so that you can see how that will be constructed and what that will look like. This type of halo lit signage is consistent for both the AC and the Citrine. So as we go through this and you see halo lit signage, this is what we're talking about. Next slide, please. Sheldon mentioned very quickly also the type C and D signage. The C signage is really so that people don't walk through glass. It's just a band on some of our larger glass windows so that there's a level of safety and people don't run into those. It protects from bird strikes and other things we found over the past that can be an issue. And then the placard that is on the building, which is the sign type C, is really a critical element of the brand appearance. Next slide, please. So I'll take a moment to just very quickly explain that again, the Citrine is this different style of hotel for Marriott. Each one has a unique character to it. I've given a couple of examples for others that are in other areas. For us, we've chosen this lemon verbena as the motif, and that leaf, the blossom that comes off of that is important for a number of reasons in terms of the design. And when you see the interior, you'll see how that's reflected throughout. But the detail in that and the delicacy of that is important for us. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to just pass by some of the other things that we've talked about here in terms of the halo lit signage. I think you all understand that clearly now, and just focus on this cabinet sign for a moment, which is something that exists in many locations in Palo Alto. A number of sign programs that have been approved at staff level have cabinet lit signage like this. The Homewood Suites is a good example that's right up around the corner on El Camino. For us, I want to make sure that everyone understands that the balance between contrast and legibility of this is pretty critical. We have dimmable LEDs inside this cabinet, and our intention is to turn this down so low that the logo really glows and is present and is not washed out in any way by the brightness of the sign. And if there is some concern about this, we would welcome a condition where some of the board members or staff would come out with us at the site as we've got this turned on, and we can dial that up or down to make sure that it's not too bright. But I will say that film is not a good option for us on this because it would damage the intricacy of the design. Go ahead to the next for me as well, Sheldon. So mirroring, again, as we said, what's going on the AC, we've got these internal signs, the type G, and then going to the next, also the, go ahead to the next, yeah. More of the detail that you've already seen. I'm just skipping through this because Sheldon explained it so clearly. And then again, for the Citrine, the similar placard and the glass mounted vinyl to create some privacy protection help on that. Let's flip to the next and talk just briefly about these signs that are mounted on the canopy. So as I showed early on, this type of sign is a very specific brand standard. It appears on every single AC hotel. And this is a location, because it is on the interior of the property and really not visible from the exterior in any way, we did stay with a essentially an internally lit sign that will glow in the way that the AC has asked us to make it happen. These letters will be mounted to the top of the canopy, and we'll have a brightness to them that is very consistent with the brand standard. If you go to the next for me, Sheldon, we're contrasting that with the. I'm sorry?
So a quick time check, it's been 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll go very quickly. I have really two more slides. The Citrine is different than the AC in this way. We're going to just use the same halo lit signage. Next slide. The last thing that I'll mention very briefly is the way this sign was calculated. I respect what Sheldon has done here. I do have a pocket slide if anyone wants to see it. This panel is actually made up of a series of individual pieces of metal. And so the sign itself is actually quite a bit smaller than that large wall. And the large wall is actually made up of a bunch of smaller pieces. So if that helps to change how any of you might review that, I'd be happy to discuss that. Thank you very much. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Randy and Rashik. At this point, I'd like to open the meeting to public comment. Vin, do we have any speaker cards?
There's no raised hands.
Okay, to any members of the public, now's the chance to speak. Okay, then we'll close the meeting to public comment. Do we have any questions of the applicant, please, from the board?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Osman.
Mr. Pop, you said that that wall sign is made up of smaller elements. What did you mean when you said that?
Sheldon, if you could open my presentation back up and flip to the first pocket slide, I think it'll help explain what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and staff also has a few definitions ready to go when you need them.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to bend the intent of this in any way, but I do want you to just understand if you drop down, Sheldon, I'm not sure. I think it's slide 22. Great. So this is a Core 10 wall, and of course, we're not Richard Serra here. We're not going to bend a giant piece of steel the way he might. So what we're doing is we'll be faceting this sign, and there will be very slight, about 1-inch gaps between the individual panels. And so you can see highlighted in red. I don't know, Sheldon, if it's possible for you to enlarge that to full screen. I appreciate that. You can see the dashed lines there around some of the pieces are where the actual signage exists. And then I will share that we have heard from the fire department that they may prefer the 744, 748 building numerals to actually be on the building itself. So we're not certain about where those will exist ultimately. We're going to do whatever the fire department tells us we have to do, but we prefer them to be out on the front as we've shown them and as staff has asked us to place them. But yeah, this is just to very quickly answer your question. I'm sorry for being too long about this. It's segmented, and we are only applying the sign to a portion of this segmented wall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sheldon, do you have a response for me regarding the measurement of the citrine wall sign?
I think Sheldon might still be working on that measurement. So if I can share my screen here.
Randy, you might also want to chime in. I just don't measure it to be nearly as large as the report says it is. And I want to understand what I'm missing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll ask Jody to relay what staff interpretation of this is. My guess is, and I used to struggle with this when I was in the position you are all in today. Very often the sign requirements state that you have to include the entire wall surface or some large portion of the wall surface in the measurement of the sign rather than just drawing a boundary bubble around the sign itself. And so I think that may be what's occurring here, but I'll leave it to Jody to describe what her interpretation is.
Yeah, and so that's especially true for the monument sign, that it is the entire sign structure is considered the sign area. And so that's why that monument sign is looking so large. As far as the wall sign, I think those could be calculated as 2 individual pieces. And I don't know if it was done as 1 rectangle or 2. And I think that's what Sheldon's working on to verify those numbers. The other question that I think the board had, the sign area comes out of the definitions of the sign code. And then as far as the business name, that comes out of prohibited signs. It does say that the sign shall be the place of business enterprise, solely for naming the business. It's not to advertise products or anything like that. But it does give some leeway for what we consider the name. It's incidental to the naming, if there's some add-on, such as the Palo Alto that goes along with the hotel name.
So Jody, you're saying that in staff's opinion, the addition of the word Palo Alto is appropriate?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Then let's just bring this back to the board. Who wants to get started here? Maybe Alex?
Sure. Thank you, Randy. I'm generally in favor of the proposed project. I think I would add in the sign exception finding number 1, is I think my recommendation would be to add that the 2 hotel entrances are internally facing, because that would actually, when you actually factor that in, it really explains why there are more signs. And I think the other factor I'm thinking is that the signs that are being proposed are sort of some of them are oriented to automobile drivers, but a lot of the other ones, say like the plaques and the door signs, are oriented to pedestrians. And the entrances to the buildings are sort of hidden internally around the corner. And so I think that sort of explains much of the additional signage. I do like the halo lit. I do like the logo of the Citrine Hotel. And if we can work around it with dimmers, then I think that's probably preferable to film, which I would imagine won't last or won't age as nearly as well. So yeah, so that's where I am on this one. I think the hotel is coming along well, and look forward to seeing hearing what the other board members think of this project.
Thank you, Alex. Grace, you'd like to take us further,
Sure.
please?
I want to thank Sheldon for a very clear report, and Randy, it's nice to see you. Thank you for your presentation. I have similar comments as Alex, and I'll be brief. And but just stepping up a little bit back, I just want to say that it's wonderful to see this project moving forward on San Antonio, and signage is one of those wonderful pieces and can be quite difficult. But what I find the signage to do, and I'm happy to see here, is that it begins to break down the scale of the walls, and it really begins to define the overall new building and environment. Signage is so important for wayfinding, and Alex, thank you for just alluding to the pedestrian. That we need this for the pedestrians, and also on the vehicular scale. I feel like the proposed application here is rather well balanced and actually works quite well with the architecture. So the other piece that I wanted to mention is that I appreciated the comments about brand recognition and marketing. However, I think signage does sometimes, especially with a brand, become something that we don't want to be something that we see the same everywhere. I understand the importance of a logo and how that actually works with Marriott and all of that. But I think it's actually more important that it works with the architecture. And if there's a way to balance that equation in terms of being true to your marketing and brand recognition, but also working well with the architecture, I think that's the goal in this for us to discuss today. So like Alex, I would be definitely in favor of some kind of dimmable LED as proposed by the applicant. My concern when I first saw the package is what a wonderful package. I can see everything, I can read everything. But when I saw that logo, particularly as a cabinet, that box lit up, I appreciate this wonderful motif and the lemon verbena. It's rather delicate, and my worry is that with the background being this white acrylic face, we just want to make sure there's a congruency. So that is really the only comment that I have. Perhaps that's something that we as a board can discuss in terms of adding that as a condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. David, your turn, please.
Well, this is the first sign project that I've seen, so it's been fascinating to see what is it.
Good.
Can you
Where
hear
to get
me?
a snack from? What?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Chris is muted now. Thank you.
This is the first sign project that I've seen here in Palo Alto, and unfamiliar with other areas of the country here where we don't talk so much about signs, and it's interesting to see how much detail is carried through to this very element on these buildings. I agree with the other board members' comments here, Alex to begin with, and Grace to follow up on everything that, pretty much everything they've said. I'd like to add that I think that the idea of having a sign down low in front and then on the building is appropriate to the traffic street here, and those two locations are good for identity for the hotel, for the visitor to find their way to it. It's very interesting, this idea of the two hotels sharing that courtyard. And yes, Alex's comment about the different signage you need really on the inside, because that becomes private space there. So I think that you need that identity, and it's really well done. I really like the differentiation of the two hotel type sign types, and the citrine is particularly attractive as a graphic design with a flower as well, and interesting to see that. Curious to know if some of that decoration is actually carried into the hotel, but we don't have to answer that now. I can wait until I see the hotel's completed. The color change and all of that, I think kind of is important to note that it relates nicely to the color of the building. And of course, it relates in some way to the type of service that is going to be provided by the two buildings, which is again reflected in I think, the graphics there. So I can certainly say that I'm proud to be part of approval here of all of what has been done. I think Randy's a good job on this one, good signage. So I don't have as much knowledge of the detail as Grace was talking about, of how it was constructed. I do absolutely agree that being able to re-stack those signs down is a good idea, and that something we can work with you on as it proceeds, so that it isn't overwhelming at night time, but yet it can be seen, because certainly clients will come late to this building. So good job. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, David. Ozma.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thank you so much, Sheldon, that was a really excellent presentation, really clear. You know, I've seen a couple of sign projects, and I do have a bit of critique on the drawings. I did feel like a lot of the images were really low resolution, and had a little bit of a hard time envisioning what that sign would look like because of the resolution. But I feel like Sheldon's presentation really cleared a lot of my concerns. So I really appreciate that. I do think the halo lit is probably the best choice. You know, the indirect light is a lot nicer to look at. For the cabinet on the Hotel Citrine, I do have a concern, and this, again, it might be the resolution of the drawings, but I can see the panel, so there's the panels that that make up the wall behind it, and they have you know, spacing that is a design. So like the seams between the panels is a design, and currently the way the cabinet is placed in the drawing that I'm looking at, which is drawing 10 of 16, that cabinet does not seem to be aligned with the panels in any way that makes sense. And am I allowed to share my screen so that we know what we're looking at, or I can ask Sheldon to pull up this image?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay. So, so I'm looking at this image, and you can see, so again, it's like not great resolution, but you can see that the patterning of the wall that's behind the sign doesn't have a very strong relationship to where the location of the cabinet is placed. I appreciate that the wording, the verbiage of the letters is just above this horizontal, which makes sense, but I wonder if there might be an option to, you know, either have this centered in a bigger panel, or at least, you know, shifted a little bit so that it makes sense with the panel spacing. that's my only concern with how this sign is placed, in terms of it being harmonious with the rest of the facade. Otherwise, I guess I'll unshare. Otherwise, in terms of it being a dimmable cabinet, I don't have too much issue with that. I do think it is important that we monitor the brightness of that, just because everything else will be halo lit and indirect. This definitely has the danger of being, kind of overpowering. And I also hope it's probably, I'm sure, I mean, it's a hotel. I hope it's cleaned regularly so that like bugs are not showing through there. But that was my main comment. If there's something that we can have as a subcommittee or something under consideration for that item, I think that is important. But other than that, I can recommend approval.
Thank you, Ozma. I will say that I'm in concurrence with my colleagues. I thought Alex's comments were appropriate regarding the fact that the hotel buildings are inward facing, and that's a good distinctive justification for the exception. Ozma, I'm afraid I don't agree with you regarding the horizontal shifting of the citrine can. I think when I was out there yesterday, at least, the patterning of the tiling and the material behind that is fairly indistinct. It's really tough to notice too much how it's related. And when you're seeing this from far away, I think that's sort of a detail that this is not that relevant on this project. So I don't think I think also it's probably a real hassle for these guys to shift that. I'm sure they've set that stuff technically within the building already.
That's what's coming in.
Yes, Randy, would you like to add clarification to that? Go ahead if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you. I just respond quickly that the comment that Chair Palte just made is I believe very accurate. The patterning of the panels themselves is very subtle relative to the surface finish of that material. It's not nearly what the drawing describes, and there's almost no way to get that to represent in a drawing, and I apologize for that. But the intent here really is to have this sort of random patterning of material and have a sign that's centered. And so
Thank you, Randy. Randy, that's enough. Thank you. Okay. I have a minor concern, I guess, regarding the wall signs and their size and whether we grant an exception for that or not. Sheldon, I was asking about the size because by my measurements, even if you take a rectangle encompassing both the can sign and the text, you're only at about 95 square feet. And that would put it below the need to have an exception. So I'm curious as to how we came up with those measurements. And I think the size of the sign is fine. I'm just not sure what the best precedence to be setting is. And I think that it's actually less than, I went through this last night pretty carefully, reading the various definitions of area in the sign code. And I think you could argue whether you count these things as separate pieces, the text and the can, that makes it down to about 25 square feet. But even if you're more conservative and call it one rectangle, it's about 6 feet high by 15 feet 9 inches wide. And so I just don't see where 136 square feet comes from. So
yeah,
what I
so if you right, so under your I did check that, and under your measurements, we still need to count the other signs that are along that plane. So on the interior, they're still exceeding the amount that they're allowed. But along San Antonio Road, that would put it under. So if the 96 square feet would then put that sign under the threshold for that wall, but the other sign on the interior is still over when you consider the other signage.
Okay, I didn't run the math on all of these. The question then for staff, I guess, is that when you're doing a master sign program, does that let us justify that they're using the overage of square footage on other facades on the facade in question? So the sign program is what's allowing the exception, or do we have to find specific findings as you've put in your list here, the fact that it's a hotel, things like that? Jody, can you help me out with that, or Sheldon?
So there's a section of code about combination of signs. It's pretty specific about if you have a freestanding sign and you're your other signs you can have are it's very specific, and that's where the master signing program kind of comes in play. But it also does allow you to kind of move the sign area around a bit. But the sign exceptions are still in play. You still need to consider the individual aspects of the signs, and in particular here we have the freestanding signs that there's a clear exception there for those. You can only have one sign, one freestanding sign, and then the size of the signs are also too big.
Okay, so to my colleagues, my concern is that I don't want us to be granting sign exceptions all the time. And I think the findings, the justification has to be logical. And I don't think saying that it's a 2.0 FAR building logically allows bigger wall signs. The wall signs are regulated by the area of the wall. And so the building size doesn't really relate to that. So the FAR shouldn't matter. So that I just don't think that's a good justification to put in here. That way, but according to this justification, every hotel with a 2.0 sign is going to be bigger. And I don't think that's appropriate. I think that only applies to the wall signs on the Citrine project. If one of them is actually measured okay, I think if the other ones are bigger than what's allowed by the code, they should be made smaller. It's not that big a deal, and there's no justification for that. I think the justification Alex mentioned about the buildings being inward facing and the fact that there's 2 hotels, not 1, is plenty for the monument signs in the front. It's fine to have 2 of them. And the fact that they have this curving wall thing as the structure, I think that all makes sense. That seems to be a unique exception to justify a sign exception. But I'm having a hard time making the exception just on the wall signs on the area based on the language and the findings here. So what I'd like to do at least is change the language under finding number 1 to strike the stuff about FAR and rather stick to the justification Alex offered, that it's 2 hotels and they're inward facing. I think we're just opening up Pandora's box if we allow a larger FAR to be the purpose for a sign exception.
So thank you, Peter, for that conversation, because we do want to limit these exceptions as much as possible. And sorry for the interruption. This is, pandemic, kids are at home and the school's calling kind of thing.
No, I've got the phone going off the hook here too.
So, but the particular wall that you're asking about is what?
Well, I'm saying that the wall signs on the Citrine building, there's ones facing San Antonio, which perhaps the area is less than we think and it's okay. And then it seems the combination of wall signs facing into the courtyard is collectively larger than the amount allotted. It must be close. And if you recalculate the areas, it may be okay. But Sheldon says it's over by a little bit. What I'm saying, I guess, is that I can't find a justification to make a sign exception to have larger wall signs because the building is inward facing or because it's a larger building, the FAR is bigger. Those are not reasons to me to justify that. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that we're just they're great looking signs. They seem to fit the buildings just fine. But I don't think that's the proper justification for this thing.
Okay, and Sheldon, we've recalculated the San Antonio elevations, and what numbers did you ultimately come up with?
Yeah, I would concur with the Chair Balte's 96 square feet.
Okay, meaning that it is within the limits then.
For the San Antonio frontage, and then when you take into account the other signs along the other interior, it still exceeds, not by much, as Chair Balte mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like it if we could just see that the numbers make it not exceed at all. If you were to take that can sign and letter sign and treat them as separate pieces, then the problem goes away. The definition requires it to be separated by 1.5 times the dimension of one of the pieces. So it's a little bit tricky, but it's very close. But I don't want to get into the parsing on that. What I'd like to do is have us modify the rationale for finding number 1 to remove the FAR justification, and instead stick to the fact that this is 2 hotels on 1 parcel and that their hotels are inwardly facing. as the rationale for why this sign exception is granted. My other thing is that I'd like to see us have a strong condition regarding the light, the brightness of the can sign, the citrine sign. I think it'd be fine if staff were to check that, but I'd like it to be a condition where somebody goes out there in the evening and really does see it be adjusted to satisfy that it's not a big spotlight onto the greenhouse community across the street. It's otherwise a 4-foot by 2-foot spotlight. If you really turn up those LEDs, it could be quite bright. And that's potentially a real nuisance to the neighborhood, who was pretty upset and took some persuasion for this project to begin with. It seems an easy thing. Unfortunately, I agree with, I think it was Alex who thought about the film is probably not going to weather well if you try to force that kind of a fix on a sign like this. And if the LEDs are dimmable, that's an easy solution. The applicant's willing to do it. I'd like to see a strong condition on that, though. So again, I'd like to modify finding 1 and make sure we have a good condition of approval on the can sign, and I support this project. Any other comments following up on what everybody else said? Does anybody else support Ozma's concept about the aligning of the citrine can sign, for example? Then would anybody like to make a motion for us? Okay. So
Peter, I think you need a motion. You just need to make it formal. Seconded.
if you could, Alex, please. I'd rather not have it come from the chair all the time.
Okay, so I will move that we recommend approval of the project, subject to modifying finding number 1 to remove references to floor area and larger buildings, and to add to that finding that the buildings are, that there are 2 hotels, there are 2 buildings on one site, and they are internally facing. And then to add a condition of approval that staff review the citrine cabinet box signs at night, and to review the illumination levels of those signs at night. And that's it.
I can second that. If Grace, would you like to second? Are you?
Oh, either way, I'm fine with you seconding.
Go ahead, Grace. You second then, please.
Okay, I'll second.
Okay, so the motion's been made and seconded. Would anybody like to address that motion? Jody, can you clarify that that condition is feasible, that we can actually check those lights, the can light?
Yes, that's absolutely feasible.
Okay, then. Vin, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Bolte,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Yes.
The motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the great application, everybody. Why don't we move right along? Does anybody need a break? This next one's going to be quite a bit to go through. Okay, so let's move on to we're in a study session now. Is that right, Jody? I'm trying to find it in the agenda here.
That's right. It's a study session.
Yeah, sorry, my mute was not working. You are correct.
Okay, so let me figure out which one. I can't find the introduction for this one on my screen right this instant. Bear with me 1 second here.
And Veronica, do we have a slide that starts this off or no?
No, should I?
Okay,
quickly
that's
do?
fine. And I think Chris is now an attendee and we should promote him.
Okay, so we're doing a study session for ARB review of draft objective standards, which is continued from October 15th, 2020. And I guess we start out straight away with the staff presentation. There's no disclosures on the study session. So Jody and staff, take it away.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm actually going to have Jean Iceberg with Lexington. She's been helping us a great deal on these objective standards. And she has some other members, Chris as well, and possibly Jeremy, that will be helping as well. So thank you. Go ahead, Jean.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Chair, can you see my screen? Okay, great.
Yes.
So great, thank you. We're gonna pick up where we left off a month ago on objective standards. You'll recall that we made a lot of progress. So I'm just gonna do a very quick recap and then we're gonna move forward. And if time allows, we'll try to go backwards again and provide some feedback and revisions based on the feedback that you gave us at the last meeting. And so we have 4 more topics that we're going to go through. We'll try to keep to about 10 minutes per topic. And then again, if time permits, we'll go back and take a look at some of those previous topics. So we made it through some of the big picture items in terms of the relationship between the building and the street, the public realm, access and building orientation and building massing. We're going to pick up back on facade design, go through residential entries, open space, and the example of materials. So, we've been working with you as a full board and with the subcommittee of board members, Thompson and Hirsch, over the past year. And so we're meeting again today for our 5th meeting, and based on what happens today, we're going to figure out where we're going to go next. So we may come back to the board as a whole. We've also discussed bringing the board and the PTC together. The PTC is very interested in hearing your feedback on the architectural side in terms of the objective standards. So we'll revisit this once we get through today. So I'm not going to go through my whole presentation. I'll pause after each section to have questions and discussions among the board. You'll recall that we started facade design last time. And so again, the way that this objective standards draft is organized, we have a series of intent statements that are the subjective guidelines, and those are drawn directly from the context-based design criteria. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the sections that include all of the draft standards, which are requirements and are written to be objective. So last time we talked about the intent statement and we talked about base, middle, and top. And you'll recall that the board's recommendation was that we actually remove the base, middle, and top guideline from the intent statement, but keep it as a standard. So essentially a project that is looking to meet objective standards for whatever reason would need to show that base, middle, and top. If they did not want to do that, they could instead meet the intent behind this intent statement, excluding the need for a base, middle, and top. So they could come to you in a very modernist box form, and at the discretion of the ARB, that project could be considered and approved. So just briefly running through what that looks like, we had, again, our base, middle, and top set of standards. We did get some feedback last time on the graphics, and so Chris and his team have made some revisions to those graphics, specifically to focus in on the specific element that relates to that, that standard. So instead of showing, windows everywhere, if the standard doesn't relate to the windows, if we're just talking about on the upper left corner here, that step back or recessing of the facade, that's what's shown in the diagram. So some changes to the diagrams that you'll see next time around. So this is where we left off on facade articulation. If we had some changes in the packet numbering, but you'll notice that the packet you received was the exact same set of standards as last time. So if you're looking at your old packet from October, it's packet page 34. If you're looking at the packet from today's meeting, it's packet page 56. I do have the standard up on the screen. I know it's very small font, but this is just to provide a visual cue for the discussion. So Chair, I was going to pause there if you want to go through facade articulation.
Okay, does anybody have anything to comment on regarding facade articulation?
I have a question, and this is just an inquiry for when it is a good time to discuss this. But I think there's been comments on the graphics, the exhibits, and I guess I'm wondering, we just saw an update. Like, do we want to talk about that as a separate item from the
Yes,
text?
yes. Osma, I think we should discuss the format, the graphics as a separate thing. Maybe as we finish all this, I think it might be a bit of a discussion. I don't want us to get bogged down in that quite yet. Does
Okay.
anybody else share that thought that we might want to just discuss that as a whole amongst the board?
I just wanted to, thank you. I watched the video from the last meeting. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend, and I'm wondering if it's at all possible to talk about the slide previous, that the base the base middle top, and then the requirement of 2 or more. Is that now closed? Are we moving forward now just to the this facade articulation, or just want to check in?
I think we're fine going back to just the base, middle, and top, but then we wanted to keep going from there, and we can come back around a second time as needed.
How do you all, is that okay then, as a group? I just wanted to clarify the 2 or more of the following 4 techniques. I don't recall if you discussed that on the video from last meeting. Is that something that's agreed?
The base, middle, top thing?
Yeah, just the 2 or more of the 4 techniques. Is this something that we are all comfortable with?
I'd like to see us, I agree with Grace, I'd like to see us talk about this in detail. And I have some further thoughts regarding the way in which we seemingly decided that the way they would use base, middle, top might really not work very well. And my feeling was it should reverse. It should go into the earlier, it should not become a standard by itself.
I guess that was my question too, like David, I wasn't sure, was there agreement in the last meeting that it would come out of an intent statement and become a standard?
No, yeah, so
Let me address it, I guess, because I think I pushed for this. My argument is that building a building with a base, a middle, a top is not in and of itself a design. It's a technique when you design the building to give it a scale or a proportion that we somehow relate as more human. And so it seemed to me more appropriate to put that down as an objective technique if somebody wants to use it. But there are other ways architects build buildings that meet these other design intents without a base, middle, and top. And so by forcing a base, middle, and top on every building, which is what would happen if you put it in the design intent, you sort of tie the hands of architects who want to do something different. And I feel that it is possible to design a building that meets these other design intents without having a defined base, middle, and top. And I didn't want to see us get locked into that. I think it's harder to define in an objective fashion, but there are many buildings that have been done well that way.
So one comment to make here is that you'll notice that the illustrations of a base, middle, top is a discrete, smaller scale building, pretty minimal dimension here, rather than a larger building. And therefore, it might not apply very well to any other type of building, or it might, or a building that's in a contextual situation with other buildings also have basement and top. So I think that originally it was put in the more subjective portion of this presentation as just one possibility, rather than in the design portion here where it's being a specific requirement.
Well, but isn't that what we're doing, David? By putting it in the specific thing, we're saying that's the specifics are one way to demonstrate compliance. If you put it in the intent, every building has to meet the intent, regardless of the path you take to get there.
I think there were alternates in the intent section. Isn't that true?
Jean, do you mind just scrolling and going back to the previous slide so we see the intent statements?
I guess, are we not, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, Esma, go ahead. I do have a thought here, but go ahead.
No, go ahead. I cut you off. I'll go after.
Oh, no, I appreciate this intent statement. And, when I see these bullet points, I guess my feeling, Jean, if you go to the next slide, a lot of the language shows itself under the objective standard. So you see how under base, middle, top, we begin to use a similar language of 1, 2, 3, 4. So my feeling is that the intent is already, and I guess my issue is really this 2 or more of the following 4 techniques. I mean, I love these 4 as options and strategies. The graphics I don't love, but at the same time, I think it's wonderful to have these 4 statements. I see this language in the intent. And so I'm just wondering if we need this base, middle, top as an objective standard. There definitely is more in terms of, I mean, to be fair, and when I see 1, 2, 3, and 4, we point to architectural features in a way that is much more detailed. However, the intent statements, does anybody agree? I feel like this language shows itself in the intent statement. And so I'm just not sure.
Well,
My
I think
feeling,
it's-
and I agree with you, Peter. I think that the base, middle, top in the objective standard, you have the option in the intent to go to the ARB where there might be a descriptive discussion, right? You know, you moving it to the objective standard. However, I wonder if, given what we're trying to do, it might be more effective to think about options of techniques as illustrative examples in the standards without a specific number of 2 or more. That's one piece. And then the second is how we define base, middle, top is really in the 1, 2, 3, 4, right? In terms of these options. I mean, that's my reading of this.
Well, okay, great. I'm not sure, Grace, I see that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are part of what define base, middle, and top.
These are techniques, right? In terms
They're
of
all, yeah, they're techniques. They're trying to put a objective wording to a technique of our facade design. I think you could argue that any one of those may be sufficient.
right. So
That's the
another
feedback
thing
staff is looking
I
for
agree
from
with
us.
you. Yes, I do not think you need 2 or more of the following techniques.
Do you think it's 1 or more?
Well, are we too prescriptive in the numbers in terms of choosing 1, 2, 3, or 4?
We need to be very prescriptive in this area because if a project meets this test, then it may not come before the ARB and it will be reviewed by staff. And so
Okay.
staff
Well,
needs
then,
clear direction.
I mean, hearing that from Jody, and I understand, I feel like the intent of this standard, it is an intent really that, you know, all of these techniques, the variation in these different ways is part of our intent. So that's why I feel like maybe it should move back to the intent and maybe different wording.
Grace, I'm not sure if, I mean, the intent is a broader envelope that covers these objective standards, but it allows for additional ways of doing it. And what this series of, what we're looking at now on the screen is designed to be sort of bullet points they can check off. If you put this back into the intent, then how does an applicant know how to, what do they specifically have to do?
Well, that actually is related to the thought I had earlier, where if we're getting rid of that line in the intent statement, if we don't want to say articulation of the building base or ground floor, body or middle, and top or cornice, we should replace that with an intent statement that says these things, that articulation of building should break down scale via building modulation, facade articulation, fenestration.
To me, that would be very appropriate.
I think that's a good point, Ozma. Can we go back to the, yeah, so can you say that again, Ozma? Articulation of the building?
Articulation of the building should break down scale via building modulation, facade articulation, and fenestration.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Does everybody else, what do they think? David and Alex?
Did you say it again?
Hold on, let me write this down. Articulation of building should break down scale via uh, facade, oh, bloody hell.
I have it written down.
Oh, thanks,
Um,
Chris.
Articulation of the building shall break down the scale via building modulation, facade articulation, and fenestration. Scale of the building.
Which are 3 of those points on the base, middle, top, because I think the 4th one is a combination, right?
Add fenestration variation or some adjective on fenestration. Every building has fenestration.
Fenestration pattern.
Variety of fenestration.
Pattern.
Pattern is fine, something.
So number 4 is
Part of 4. Scale facade driven pattern. Okay, but that's not
pattern.
How about and variation of fenestration and material patterns?
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yes, that's 1. Mhm.
So what we're proposing is that we change this 3rd bullet point on the intent statement for facade design to be what we just drafted. Does everybody agree with that?
Well, I do. Yeah, I can agree with it, but I object to the use of the next part of it, which is the specific requirement. That it,
Now let's now come to the next section, which is if you want to do an objective standard, what are the standards that you have to meet? We're all on board with this so far? Grace, this is addressing your concern?
I think that's much better than
Okay.
the previous we X'd out. Mhm.
That's great. I agree. So let's go to the objective standard now, this screen here, right? So I'm afraid, Grace, if you didn't have at least 2 of these, someone could very easily comply just by having variation in fenestration. And that's such a loose definition that almost every building can be made to fit that standard. And I'm concerned. I think we should keep the objective standards tight. David, you're saying you have some issues with this. How would you like to see it changed?
well, actually, you're right. It would be a problem bringing it into be reviewed, and then it isn't so specific. And frankly, that's what I like about it. I'm having a personal problem with the idea of creating objective standards, period.
Okay, but right now we're not debating the philosophy of objective standards. We're just trying to provide guidance on the standards.
Now, there will be people, I think it's a mistake to think that they won't become.
I can't hear you, David. You're too far from your.
I think they won't be, that it's a mistake really to think that these will not become cut into stone and in the future, and people who choose to go this direction will be avoiding a review by an agency like ours, and get cookie cutter buildings.
That ship has sailed, David. We need to decide how we can write objective standards that reach as close as we can to our intent.
Well,
is there anything in these written standards? For example, do you think we should have only 1 of them apply, not 2 or more? Or the opposite, should we do all 4 of them?
I'm for all of these standards being applied. I think that the original
Grace, why wouldn't it be okay just to require all 4 of these to be applied? They're all, I mean, something that almost any good building would meet these 4 design intents, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think all 4 are excellent. However, I think my issue is with base, middle, top, to be honest. I think it is base, middle, top, and the graphics that I'm objecting to. And at the same time, I'm not strongly objecting to, but I want to step back. Are we as a group, and I saw the timeline, Jean, and thank you, and team, I just wonder, will this draft be public for stakeholders, for example, professional development and design designers, to actually review and give comment, for example. And also, I saw in the video, and I really appreciate it, there was the question, can we as a group receive some summaries or some understanding of what other cities are doing in the Bay Area? I know that there have been some stakeholder processes, right, in terms of input from folks who might have some direct knowledge and experience building in the area. This is in a really important document. I just want to make sure that there is a forum for that. I think it's important. And also I understand your timeline that you would love to have something in place in case projects come through. However, can you just comment on that for us?
So
Let me first, Grace, in our preliminary meeting the other day, I asked staff that we finish this second hearing of preliminary review, and then that we have one more full-blown architectural board review of this entire thing before it gets passed on to the Planning and Transportation Committee. And then I suggested that the Planning and Transportation Committee meeting might be better with a representation from the Architecture Review Board, perhaps the members of our committee there rather than the full board. Just so you know, that was my formal request as chair to staff. Jody, what's your take on how the process is going to go forward?
So I think we did talk about, sort of finishing this first round, coming back with a second round, and then going on to the PTC. I am getting a little more anxiety that we are going to have projects coming in to the city that want to use the SB 35 or the SB 330 state regulations. That's starting to become more of a reality. And so the timeline on this, we need to continue and finish this. And again, we can make the box as small or as large as we want. By saying 2 items here, we've kind of made a medium-sized box that projects can fit into and go forward quickly. But it's fine too. I mean, we're here, staff's here talking to the ARB. We want to use your professional expertise to understand, what makes a high quality project, because we still want to get that high quality, even if we're streamlining the process.
Can we, Jody, I know this is not directly what we're talking about, but can we address the question of whether we get stakeholder feedback from other, say, design professionals in town? Is this information we're looking at as part of the public record? So it's available right now to anybody who wants to see it, right?
It is. Anything that the planning department does is public information. Anyone can request it. However, we also, for all of our projects, we put them all on the webpage. Anything that comes before the ARB or any other public hearing has a web page and is available out to the public. I want to say that I've also contacted at least a handful of architects that told them about these public hearings and things, and let them know that they could participate. But I think, sometimes when it's not part of a actual project, they may, be working on other things.
Grace, do you feel that we're actually doing public outreach of a sufficient nature for this, given what Jody just said?
Well, no. I just recall in the past, and Jody, you are doing a terrific job, and I really appreciate this. And of course, we're coming on the holidays, and we're in this state. In the past, when there were green building guidelines, when there were some important things coming up, there was actually kind of a concerted effort to really hold a meeting that might include not only designers, but also development consultants. I think that it's more than architects that we need to reach out to, just given the impact of something like this. The other piece that I want to mention is if we go back to this and look at it further, I just want to offer, and I'm so sorry, but my feeling is we don't need the words base, middle, and top, and the graphics. And my worry is that we are writing a recipe for cookie cutter architecture to occur in our city. So my reaction to the graphics and to the word base middle top is just that. And you know, I do think um, we want to include language, and maybe this is just something that, I mean, I'd love to hear from board members what you think about this. But I mean, these are terrific things to have. I think I'm reacting to the graphics and this word base middle top. I mean, as a tagline. Um,
Yeah, I
and I
think
apologize for it. It's something that really does stick in my mind as an impediment.
I think that's important, and that's actually part of why I was wanting to suggest that we talk about the graphics first, just because I do think it's clouding a lot of how we're interpreting, or like it's everything, right? It's not just the words, it's also the graphics. And then as far as your issue with the terms base, middle, and top, I'd be open to considering other terminology that achieves similar design intent, which could be like scale in facade, or something like scale and facade modulation. And maybe there's ways. I think when I first had a pass on this, and like when David and I first had a chance to look at it, there are other ways to kind of consider this perspective of how we perceive a building. There's like the pedestrian speed, there's like the vehicular speed, there's also the distant, the close and the distant. Like I think base, middle, and top are sort of talking about distances of perspective, like when you're standing right at the building versus when you're across the street versus when you're really far away. There could be other ways. I think as architects, we still care about those approaches to a building. Like we still want a building to function well at those different distances or scales. So maybe there's a way to articulate that if we agree that we feel like maybe base, middle, and top isn't the right terminology, maybe there's a better way to approach this standard.
Let me make a plug for keeping that terminology in the objective standard. For the past 500 years or so in Western architecture, we've been, excuse me. For 500 years or so in Western architecture, public buildings have had this basic base, middle, top. Think of Renaissance Florence on out. And that was developed in part, or became in part, as a guide to architects who weren't so skilled, as a way to keep the urban facade, urban pattern working. And I think it's a very functional way to describe to architects who are more workmanlike how to get there. And the other terminology we're using is also varied in its understanding and interpretation, that you really open the door then to potentially very poor buildings, that just big boxes. Using the term base, middle, top is something that anybody can look at past history and see what it means. Additionally, we have other guidelines in town that require a base, middle, and top. For example, along El Camino, in the El Camino design guidelines, which are still in place and in effect for all other types of buildings. All of this is just for commercial buildings. Removing that specific language just for this particular type of housing leaves a big inconsistency. You could say it even leaves us rewriting a design guideline which is established. And I think it's incumbent upon us to keep those established guidelines as well. There's a process to change them perhaps, but we have to do that. So I think we should, in the objective standard, leave base, middle, top, or some language that reflects that notion that a building has a cap, a cornice, a parapet, a roof. A building has a base, it's a heavier piece of stone or something that sets it in the ground. So I don't support removing that language from the objective standard.
Well, can I comment on it too here?
Sure, please.
Maybe the first who raised the issue that we shouldn't be including base, middle, top for objective standards. While you're right, there are buildings that work well with base, middle, top. Really, you don't find that to be prevalent today in most architecture. Certainly something that, the selection of the illustrations here is very intentional, because the small scale of the building allows you to really see it as a base, middle, top. But as soon as you get to a larger scale, program in which you're really studying a building from the inside out in many cases, rather than from the outside in specifically. Choosing a design for a building has to do with designing the building in both ways, both from planning it and from creating a facade on it. And I don't see that base, middle, top is a definition of the way design is really performed today, unless it is specifically for contextual reasons, because buildings adjacent to it have followed those particular standards. So I can't agree with you, Peter, on this one. I think that, the context planning, frankly, I got through with the first part of the review of this and then came up to this particular section. And then I took a look at our existing context planning, and the context section is really fantastic. It's a great piece of somebody's put tremendous thought into the context planning. And I find that all of these 1, 2, 3, and 4 are very much a part of context planning in the present code. So my feeling is that we should go back and look at the context planning and say, how can that be objectified? And if it can't be, then maybe we as an organization have to say, we can't accept this state requirement. I just feel, and by the way, I think the council feels the same way about the other aspects of the state program. If you followed through with their meeting the other day, there's certainly a tremendous objection to the fact that the state is requiring us to have objective standards, and that objective standards mean that our board doesn't participate in this. I mean, even if you say, okay, you can come in with the objective standards and then avoid coming to an ARB, why is that a requirement? What is it about our work that causes this to be, in stone in some way? The way it will be, well, if you just do this, this, and this, you're going to have an acceptable building. I think that we're important in this process, and that look at the whole process of what delays projects. I don't think that's really us. And if you want to say, okay, you're going to do this in one session, so you have to then abbreviate it, then actually the review by planning has to be abbreviated, and the design has to come to us anyhow. I don't think that eliminating ARB by creating a separate category of objective standards is a good idea. And I think that we should object to it. And I think that we might find support in the city for just doing that.
David, that's a larger topic than what we're trying to cover right now. I think you'd find that all of us on the ARB would agree with you fundamentally that that's correct.
If that's correct, then that's what we should say. We think that.
Can we reach a compromise, David, instead, and agree that as our public support of this thing, we also want to issue a statement essentially condemning this objective process altogether? And maybe have our subcommittee, you and Osman, draft up what that is, and we can discuss the language of that. But honestly, David, we've been given one meeting by the staff now, and they've worked very hard to put these details together. And I think we owe it to them to give them feedback on this, whether or not we think it's the best way to go forward. What you're talking about is fighting what Sacramento has passed on to us. And that's just not appropriate right now to be arguing about that. The result will be just we get nowhere. And if we take the task that's been put to us by staff through the city council, they want feedback on this stuff.
Peter, if I may, I agree, and I'm very happy to accept this draft as it's crafted, and knowing that we're going to have another discussion. So maybe we should move forward. knowing that this is kind of an area where we want to revisit and really just, thank the staff for all of this, and we should just move forward and start reviewing per Jean's rest of her presentation.
I actually have some comments though on this item.
Yes, Alex.
But I generally agree with. So, I think I looked at this with regard to existing approved projects and to see how they would comply or not comply. And I think we've got some problems here with 1C, which is the ground floor step back. I looked at like quite a number of projects, and a lot of them would not meet this requirement. So I think there are projects that are on 50-foot wide lots with garage entrances. They would not meet this requirement. And I think there are also some projects on corner lots that would not meet this requirement. And I can forward you the example.
Which slide are you looking at? Which section are you talking about?
On this screen is number 1C under base middle top.
Yes.
And I think on the screen, the diagram, it's 1B. The text, it's 1C.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't follow that. Okay. Upper floor step backs. Continue, please.
First, it's the ground floor step back.
C. And so, Alex, are you noticing that most projects actually tend to step out their bottom part of their building?
The issue is that the requirement is 2 feet for 80% length of the facade, and I'm just looking at projects, and they're not nowhere near 80%. They're more like 20%, 30%. And so I think that the formula is too strict given the different sizes of lots. So I think we need to look at that a little carefully.
So to clarify a second, one, with the base middle top standard as a whole, you only need to choose 2 of the 4 green 1, 2, 3, 4. And then out of 1, you only need to select 1 of A, B, or C. So the goal of the base middle top as a whole is to provide flexibility in architecture to, kind of try to get away from that cookie cutter aspect, but still provide objective standards. And so this was trying to go for a more, I would say modern approach where you're kind of floating the ground floor and like have a setback, like ground floor facade. But it, you can meet number 1 through A or B.
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate it. I will look at those particular projects and see how they comply with these with A or B. I think they would. But again, I think I still would be careful. Yeah, I think we should be careful about the 80%.
What
on the ground floor.
What do you recommend, Alex?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it sounds fairly restrictive on the many smaller lots that we have in town.
What if we could then propose the following? We're going to revisit this once more. Let's all come back to these specific numbers, as Alex is pointing out. This is a fairly complex interaction of concepts here. I would like to keep us moving along. Can we try to come to closure on the language of the base, middle, and top up above? We've had a lot of opinions about that. I'd like to get a straw poll, at least, whether we leave it this way or we ask the staff or subcommittee to revise it. So let me just say, I'm in favor of leaving it as it is. Who else agrees with that as compared to revising it?
Yeah, I would agree.
Alex agrees. Okay. Osma, what's your opinion?
I'm also okay with keeping it. I think I could go either way, but I want the intentions to be met one way or the other. So I would be fine to keep it.
And Grace?
Sorry, I'm on the fence here.
Okay. It's a straw poll.
Okay,
David, you've made it clear you support this language?
I can't support base middle.
Okay, so
No,
look,
I-
right now, what I've heard is a 3-2 straw poll to keep it this way. What I'd like us to do is leave it for now. We're going to come back once more in our next discussion of this, and hopefully everybody will have thought about it a little bit more, and we can try to crisply work through this particular thing. Can we go on to the next slice then, staff, please? So this is where we started, facade articulation, right? Okay, does anybody have any comments about the content here? Why don't we keep moving through all this then? What's the
No, I
next?
mean, I have some comments to make because I really think that my objection to the way a lot of this has been stated is that it is stated either too specifically or too general. And so it isn't the way one designs a building, for sure. You don't design it with 4-inch cornice projections or 2-inch window recesses, or you don't make buildings that way. So, and I think I have a lot of experience with the larger scale buildings. So I can say this with some clarity that I think all of these kind of very datums, 4 inches in depth or a minimal of 2 inches in depth, including a change in material. You know, those are specifics that are way too specific for designing buildings.
So what would you recommend, David, for item number 3? If you had to tell an architect what to do for their datum and you just had one sentence to give them and they had to follow it, what would you say?
I'm in favor of saying emphasize the depth of the windows, but I'm not in favor of saying 4 inches.
So if you don't have any number, how do we let staff evaluate whether it's sufficient?
I just want to also remind everybody the way this is written that architects only have to comply with one of these items, not all of them. So it's a menu. So if an architect doesn't like number 3, he doesn't have to do number 3, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to remind everybody that that's the case.
Thank you, Osman. That's a good point. Okay, so David objects to item number 3 being too specific.
A review process prior to getting to, say, to an ARB, because you want to do all of them or whatever. You want to do a series of things that make it more than just the minimal. What happens? Who does the review of it? How is this reviewed? You say, okay, it takes care of 1, 3, and 5, and you don't need 4, and therefore it's not there, but it makes an okay building. Who makes that decision?
So I think, David, we do need to have more of that kind of discussion about the process. I think we do have to, it's possible that these types of projects could still come before the ARB, but there are time restrictions when we talk about SB 35 projects. And so when we come back to you next, we will have some more ideas about process. Because, yeah, I don't know if planners are best equipped, you know, to figure out what a 4-inch datum line is. I can't even say the words, so there you go. Um, so, but maybe it's also a subcommittee of the ARB that's helping us review these sort of streamlined projects. So maybe that just the process, again, like we say, maybe that's something we can chew on a little bit and talk about next time.
Okay, can we flag this item number 3?
Jody, yeah, that's a good, I think that's a very good comment. How it is done, the process is very important. And that you're flexible with some thinking on that is a very good idea here.
Let's go on to the next slide, compatible rhythm and pattern. Jean, did you want to discuss this at all, or should we jump right into it?
Feel free to jump right in, or I'm happy to talk you through it. Sorry, my mouse was.
I don't have any notes of my own to add to this. What does anybody else have to say?
I think arbitrary recesses in buildings that have no function are not designed.
I agree. So should we add a statement that these have to be functionally rational too within the building and let the planning staff figure that out?
You bet.
You think that's realistic?
I wouldn't agree that the recesses are reasonable at all. Yeah.
Okay, so you're suggesting that we should remove the recesses as one mechanism of complying then?
I don't agree.
I don't agree with that.
I don't agree. I mean, it's true, like when you're not thoughtful about where those recesses go, then that's not good. But part of facade design is breaking down the scale of your building. And a recess is one of the very many techniques that architects use, amongst other things.
How do you feel if we remove number 2 of under A, where 1 is calling for facades less than 100 feet and that there is a need for recesses? I'm wondering, David, are you reacting to the specific
Yes,
dimensions?
Yes.
I felt, Grace, these all made sense to me. That if you had to specify it, it was about the right numbers.
Yeah, I didn't have any notes on this. I'm just trying to find how we might all agree.
I thought I heard board member Lou say something, but then I didn't actually hear what he said.
Go ahead, Alex.
Oh yeah, no, I support this section. And I don't want to remove the recess item.
Okay, let's keep moving on. David, I hear more or less sufficient support for this one. If you want to marshal some arguments at our final or next discussion, you can, of course. Emphasize building elements and massing. I thought this was good.
Well, once again, my concern is that the way it is written either overly specific or overly general. So
that's been noted, David.
Okay, I'm saying it again because I'm saying it specifically in this case. Item 1, it shouldn't say 5 feet in width. It should say approximately or a minimum of 5 feet in width. Not a specific dimension.
What do you give? I don't want to keep arguing about it. What else does the staff? Who else has an opinion about this piece?
The
I'm
only-
fine with them. Oh, go
I
ahead.
did note that the shared residential entry as a minimum of 10 feet, and with just knowing other projects that are less than that, I wonder if anybody feels like a range might be better, or 8 feet might be more appropriate, since we don't know how many entries that are shared. 10 feet seems generous for 3 entries or 2 entries.
I can support cutting it to 8 feet if you think that's better.
We just have to define the minimum. We don't need to define a range.
That's right, just a simple minimum.
That's the minimum. I agree with that.
What do we think? Is 10 feet the right number?
It'll be less.
Less than that, David?
It can be less, yes.
Can be less. That's good. Can we say 8 feet then? Does that make it, that sound good?
I'm fine with 8 feet.
Sounds good.
Okay, staff, can we change that to 8 feet, please, in width for item B there? Any other comments on this section? Okay, can we go on, please? Okay, ground floor character.
Wait, sorry, can we go back one? Sorry, I know we just went this one. For item 2, A, do we feel like 2 feet? Do we want to make that less for the primary building entry? Do we feel good about 2 feet?
I think 2 feet is a minimum.
Yeah, it's a minimum.
I wouldn't go less than that, no.
Any other thoughts? If I'm alone, that's fine. I was thinking it could be less. 1 foot.
No,
But if you're, I'm okay with 2 feet if everybody else is fine.
well, I
Doesn't
get
seem like
silence
anybody
and
else.
consent, so let's keep
All
going.
right, let's keep going.
Well, let's see, let me jump in that I had on this one. I think the minimum height should be 12, not 14.
I had also noted 12.
Is that right? And I had the same thing on both storefront, retail, and non-residential ground floor. The other comment I have is on item E3. I think it's okay to have an awning run the length of a building consistently. Where is that?
I
Third first sentence. I don't think that's an absolute requirement to have it be broken up.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think depending on the canopy choice, there's some examples I can think of where, especially if it's like a metal glass canopy that crosses a really long length, that can appear very fortressy.
Isn't it? I'm thinking of the Peninsula Creamery downtown has that red and silver thing that runs the length of the block almost.
Let me look it up.
Well, that's something I flagged anyway as a question mark. Anybody else's opinions about that?
Here, I had similar thoughts as you on this one.
Okay. Grace and David?
So I want to go back on B. So are we saying that there cannot be a ground floor that has grass from the ground level up?
Let's finish first my question about the awnings, David, then we'll come to your question.
Okay.
The question is, should awnings be allowed to be continuous across a facade? So far, Uzma says no. Alex and I think yes.
I think yes.
I think,
Grace thinks yes. What do you think, David?
I think yes.
Okay, so staff, can we change the language of that to remove the shall not extend, please? Then David.
But wait, so are you saying it needs to extend the whole facade or that it
I
just
just don't
can?
want to prohibit it from extending the whole facade.
Okay.
If you like to
Then
put
we
it
should
there,
delete all of 3, correct?
I delete it, right?
Uzma, would you like to try to rephrase it so it covers your concern somehow? I just don't want to prohibit it from certain features on a building. would you like to say maybe that has to be integrated with the windows?
Hold on.
Then you would eliminate it from being continuous in the whole building or a section of the building.
I mean, that's where the graphics are failing us, because on this example they're showing, it makes sense to do it this way, but there's other examples you can pick out.
Mhm.
I'm actually looking at the creamery and they do have segmented. They have one part of their facade that is continuous, but the rest of it is segmented.
So would that building meet this standard?
Are we putting a limit on how long they can be at all here?
No, there's no limit, and maybe a way to an in-between here is to stop the standard after the phrase, instead, individual segments shall be installed over each storefront entry or set of storefront windows, period. And then eliminate the shall not extend across wall sections, across multiple windows or over columns.
I'm fine with that.
I actually think the creamery would meet this standard because the parts, it doesn't have an awning where it extends over a wall section. And the parts that it does extend, it's storefront the whole way. So this, we're saying that if it is storefront, the awning can extend the whole way. Is the idea that we don't have awnings on over blank walls?
They don't serve much of a purpose.
Generally, yes.
Okay, because actually, can I just share what I'm looking at really quick so everyone can see?
Sure.
So if you look on this side, the awnings are segmented, and I don't know that it would make sense for it to continue all the way here. And then on this side, it's mainly storefront and glass the whole way.
Yeah, I guess these awnings though extend past the frame of the windows, and they're effectively continuous. This is what I think should be allowed. So let's craft the language to allow this. Can we agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so where do we stand with that language then? Is it
I
Chris?
believe it's still, yeah, I think it's, I just need to delete shall not extend across wall sections, across multiple windows or columns. So the period would be,
Okay, so we're basically not saying
yeah,
you.
we would keep the top part and just cross out the bottom.
Fine with this. Alex and Grace?
That sounds
Get rid of the.
Fine with it.
No, I want you to remove the part that says shall not extend across the entire facade.
So at the very end, though, it does
Okay.
say that it could extend across a set of storefront windows.
I just don't like the limitation of saying the entire facade. It seems to me there's some circumstances where that may come into play.
Okay. Chris, do you feel like you have enough information?
Yes.
Can we as a group agree this is a statement we'll support? The way it's shown now?
Oh, you're talking about 3 exclusively?
Yeah.
Grace and Alex?
Yes, I'm fine with it.
Sounds good.
Okay, David, what was your comment now about item B, please?
Well, I asked, what happens if you have a storefront that extends all the way to the ground?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
What if you have a storefront that extends entirely to the ground?
So item B,
That is possible. What you're actually describing is the bulkhead.
Mhm.
And the standard says if provided, it
Okay.
shall be between 12 and 30 inches from finished grade. So you can have glass extend directly to the ground, but if you are providing a bulkhead, it should be of significant size.
do you accept that, David?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Is everybody in agreement with the comment I made and Grace supported about it being a 12-foot minimum, not 14-foot minimum height?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I want to point out, just to make sure that is read from floor to floor,
No,
not like clear.
That's right.
Oh,
no, it should be floor to ceiling.
No, but why say a minimum? We've had situations where, especially on residential stuff, the developer wanted very tall base levels, and then they're not able to get enough apartments above it without pushing the building over 50 feet. If you make this a minimum, you guarantee that that's the situation. Certainly possible to do retail in a 12-foot floor-to-floor structure. Why?
I don't know that retail is very successful because if it doesn't have that extra height, because a 12-foot floor to floor means that the floor to ceiling might be 11, 10 and a half.
Yeah.
Or with ducting, even less.
Yeah.
Let the applicant decide that. If they want to balance out their residential up above being taller, why not let them choose?
So I would like to give an example here in Berkeley. There are a number of projects that have not had significant floor to ceiling heights in their retail spaces, and they stay empty because they're not quality spaces.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I feel like I remember reading somewhere that unless retail is a certain height on the ground floor, it's usually not very successful. We don't want to allow for unsuccessful retail. And there are ways.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I said, for comparison, like San Francisco and other jurisdictions set this at 18 feet. Very common is a 15-foot floor to floor.
And this is a smaller group of projects that will be streamlined. So if someone wanted to go less, they could through an ARB process.
I agree. I'm willing to change. I think you guys are correct. Grace, what's your opinion?
I agree.
Okay, let's leave it at 14 then. Anything else on this ground floor character section? Okay, the next section.
I think I need, hold on. I was trying to rewrite E3 for a second. And like, I'm a little bit worried, and maybe like if we delete the first sentence, I don't quite know what the standard is.
Chris, could you work on that offline and come back to us next time with something? You've heard our opinions about it. We have to get through all of this today.
I think he's saying he doesn't have
Sure.
enough direction, though.
If I may just add one comment, and for Chris, I just saw a situation when there's an architectural kind of a brow feature, and I don't love the word brow, but it might actually offer weather protection. So in that case, it might extend further on some buildings, ground floor. So I just wanted to offer that as that's what's my
Okay.
I think.
All right, I will come back with something.
You can feel that our subcommittee on this thing is also at your service. If you want to go back to David and Ozma, they should be able to give you further guidance.
Got it.
Can we jump to item E, please? Parking and loading.
You mean D?
Which one are we on now? Ground floor character, we just did that, didn't we?
Oh, there's a second part to it. There's
This is
a few.
Oh, I'm sorry.
right.
Okay.
So the previous page was the storefront retail scenario, and this is other non-residential, which could be ground floor office where allowed, and then residential ground floors.
I support all of this.
I might have an issue with one. It's the finished floor height, so 3A. If we require that the ground floors are 2 feet above, are we creating an accessibility issue? I mean, typically, I mean, that was kind of the critique on stoops, is that while a stoop is nice, it's not very accessible, and you have to do a lot of gymnastics to have a stoop and make it accessible. Yeah.
Sorry, this section, this individual 3A has been rewritten as a series of standards in relationship to direction from the last meeting. So the finished floor height for residential ground floor should be discussed as part of that larger discussion with the new standard.
So we're going to still come to that then, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. So Ozma, we'll catch that later on then.
Okay.
Any other? So
We'll flag this on our end.
Okay, can we keep moving then? Please.
You know, what, has anybody seen this situation where in the diagram, you actually are going to have a parking situation like that?
Well, yes, David, I've seen a number of apartment buildings in Redwood City have this sort of semi-submerged subgrade parking. That's what you're referring to?
Yeah.
It's just so expensive to go down into the ground that they try to keep it.
When you
up
have
as much
other
as-
uses on the perimeter of the building like that, either you're gonna have a parking area and it's gonna go down, but I don't think it's gonna go up like that, nor are you going to have a pattern like that.
Speak into your microphone, David, get closer.
I don't see that you're gonna have a pattern as it's shown, that the parking is going to be.
You mean the parking on the second floor in there?
Of course, yeah.
I agree. That's we have to come to the graphics.
Wait, sorry, what's the concern? That the parking on the second floor isn't a thing?
Well, the way it's drawn like this, Osmos, is not a realistic building.
I don't know if that's true. There's people that do this.
This is a very common building type these days.
This is very common.
It's a podium, it's a concrete podium with wood frame above. And the podium's at the courtyard level, so the parking is within the concrete podium, and then the wood frame above. I can point to multiple
Santana Row
projects
would be
that
a
are built this way.
And you put parking on top of the podium or underneath within the podium?
It's part of the podium.
Parking within.
Within. This is showing to my eye that it's on top of, but you're showing a two-story podium here, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. My comment on this, for what it's worth, is that I would leave it 3 feet above grade, not 6. I think it should be closer to the ground.
I'm gonna put a pin in the height above ground, again, to the overall discussion on finished floor heights. And then we should be consistent throughout the document.
Fair enough. Good point. We can push that off till later then.
So the other, sorry, just to make a comment about this, one of the virtues of having it stick up is that you can get open space ventilation in that garage. I wouldn't want to prevent something like natural ventilation, which would be cost effective and better for the environment. And I think there should be an allowance for this height as well, as it makes sense.
Okay. Chris said we're going to come to that in a second. Should we just hold off on all of that till we get to the discussion of residential height, the ground floor heights?
Sure.
If we can, then we can move on to the next big chapter. Is that okay with everybody?
Yep.
So staff, why don't you tell us about this intent and stuff, and we'll go from here.
Okay. So the residential entry section, this is intending to provide human scale details, enhance the pedestrian experience, and again, focus on that transition space between the public realm and the private space. So this gets into discussions about individual building entries as well as lobby entries to residential buildings. Whoops. Hold on. So we only have one set of standards here, which is the ground floor unit entry. And so this is showing 4 different ways where one or more of these techniques would be employed, either stoops, porches, terraces, or frontage courts. And then if you didn't want to choose one of these options, again, of course, you would have the option to go to the ARB and meet the intent statement.
Okay. Okay, what do we think about the intent statement, everybody? It's kind of hard to argue with that, I think. Any other questions or changes to it?
Nope.
David, what's your take on that?
Can we go back to the diagrams? please?
The intent, I just want to get us to sign off on the intent of residential entries here.
Yeah, no, the intent is good.
Alex and Grace,
Good.
good.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, then if we go to the individual sections. So the first one is ground floor unit entries. Again, I had noted 3 feet, not 5 for the height. Is that something we're going to fit someplace else, or is this what you're talking about, Chris, where we're doing it in more detail?
This is what I'm talking about in doing more detail.
This is a maximum number. I am fine with 5.
And is there a
I'm
minimum?
okay with 5.
I'm sorry, Alex, you said 5 is okay?
Yeah, the issue, I understand your point about like 2 feet, but I've worked on projects where there's like a sloping site, and in some cases we had to do 5 feet, and it's okay. Like it's not ideal, but it can work.
I agree.
You're okay with 5, Grace? David, what's your feeling?
Sorry, you asked me, David?
Oh, yeah, we're sort of doing a check on the height. What's the maximum height of a stoop? Probably applies to porches as well. I had suggested 3 feet, but Grace and Alex and Osma, I think too. I don't know if I heard you say that. I think 5 feet is good.
Yeah, I think 5 feet's fine.
Okay, so it seems like, David, are you supporting that too?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Do we have a minimum height for a stoop?
I mean, you could say 0, but then it's not a stoop.
And I always have an issue when you have residential stuff right at grade with the public right of way. It's just much less high quality apartment.
So I think I had provided some analysis to Jean and Chris about there actually, someone did an evaluation on this of where a stoop or a porch should be in relation to how close it is to a sidewalk. And so I don't know if they're ready with that information quite yet, but I think we should think about that. The closer the porch gets to the sidewalk, sort of the higher up it should be to feel comfortable to the person on that front porch.
That makes sense to me, yes.
So I think, okay, here's some of the graphics that we've started with, and maybe we're not fully ready to explain yet, but you can see kind of the orange where, as you get closer, the floor needs to be kind of higher up to give it some privacy, some differentiation. So if that's feeling better to people, we can keep working on that.
I think this looks good to me. Other board members?
Good.
Great. So this would apply, like, this is what I was putting a pin in earlier about required finished floor heights.
Yeah, I like this.
And we haven't,
It's a cool graphic.
It's a cool graphic, but what, does it make any sense if this is a residential building? Is it stepped on every floor above?
No, it's showing like the
no.
different options
Oh, okay.
of how close it is to the sidewalk. It's showing like a curve basically. So as you get further from the sidewalk, the lower to the ground, the privacy is allowed.
This is a great drawing right here in front of us. This really tells the story.
Yes, it's very good.
Okay, I want you to know the
I'd like to
planner
give credit
started
to
this.
Jeremy Pye.
Yeah, Jeremy did the drawings,
our
but
team.
I started the conversation.
Well done.
This is good. I think this is doing a good job of discussing this. Would this apply to porches as well as stoops then?
Yeah, because private open space associated with the unit would have to be at least when it's facing a street, would have to be at the grade or at the finished floor of the unit. So yes.
Okay. Any other feedback from the board regarding this ground floor entries regarding stoops and porches? Then how about on terraces?
How do you define a terrace?
It serves multiple unit entries, it says. So does a stoop, right?
The stoop looks like it's just only 2, and it seems like terrace could do more than 2.
You know it when you see it, David, but I don't know how to put it in words. It's true.
Yeah.
Well, I had written down to myself that the maximum height should be closer to, I wrote 23 3/4 inches because you could do 3 risers at 7 3/4 inches without requiring a handrail. When you go to 30 inches, you'll need handrails. I'm not sure that's it's a smart way to go about it, but that's just my thought at the time.
That's a good idea on a flat site.
I think you got to leave that to the architect's discretion.
Yeah.
But
I don't have any further comments on this one.
okay, how about anybody else?
I would like to say that can't we say a minimum of instead of just saying 30 inches above?
Well, you want to make it always at least 30 inches, David?
No.
Are we talking about the terrace?
Yeah.
So it's a maximum right now. You want to change it to a minimum?
Oh, let's see. Okay.
It needs to be something you can get a wheelchair up to, so you don't want to get huge ramps or anything on it, right?
I think that's why it's a maximum.
Yeah. I was just suggesting it be less than 30 inches, but I can see circumstances where 30 inches makes sense. David, are you okay with that?
Well, I guess so.
Grace and Alex, any? Okay, then frontage court. Any questions or thoughts about that?
Where does the number 25 feet come from? How is that determined?
I believe it's the distance a window needs to be from another window in a residential unit without having special size limits.
I have a general comment about the frontage court.
Okay.
Is that I think we've had a couple projects, like we have one on Hamilton, and we also have one, there's the Stanford University Terrace project on California, where they have court buildings, and they've tried to do some transparency into the courtyard, but it's not really a frontage court. So like on the Stanford project, you can see, the public can see into the courtyard, but it's gated, you know, so it's not exactly a frontage court, you know, it's an internal courtyard that's open. And then it seems to me that that type of project isn't included as one of these options. And that may be better, not my mind, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that there are courtyard building types.
Isn't that what they call a terrace, Alex? Where they have here a 42-inch hedge and 40% transparency? Well, could we just try to define the difference between a frontage court being open and a terrace potentially closed off more? Chris, do you have a sense about this?
What's the name of the apartment complex again? I'm trying to understand exactly what you're talking about.
Sure. So there's like at Stanford University, there's a project called, I think it's called University Terrace on California Avenue. It's in the research park. And there are 2 condominium buildings that are built around courtyards. But they're partially open. And then we also have and then there's also a courtyard building that was recently approved by the ARB, which is on Hamilton. And I think it's maybe Hamilton and Webster.
565 Hamilton, the most recent one.
That's quite closed off from the street. I think there's some visual screening in there, isn't there?
Yeah, well, they had originally, like the original idea was to have it more open. Anyway, I would just like throw that out there for consideration. Is like, how would that fit? It would not, I think that like that project wouldn't, it doesn't have individual entrances to the ground floor units.
That's true, it didn't.
It had handicap ramp issues that the board talked about. So let's just throw that out there and think about it and how it would fit in with this particular standard.
Can I ask you, Chris, how did you come up with the 2 foot, the depth, the maximum frontage court depth shall be 50 feet or ratio not exceed 2 feet in depth to 1 foot in width? Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So it's basically saying that it can't be like a tiny opening on the street and then super deep inside.
Right. Yes.
Maximum
So the
depth shall be 50 feet. Depth shall be 50 feet. Not to exceed 2 to 1 depth to width. It means it's deeper than it is wide.
Is that assuming a certain lot size?
No, I'm not exactly sure on this. Need to think about it for a second. And maybe we don't need
I think it
to have a maximum depth.
I mean, just again, I'm sorry, I'm not reading from local
Yeah.
local buildings, but in New York, it was just the opposite. It had to be twice as wide as it is deep. And it's called a kind of outer court, that dimension.
And so maybe we can have Chris go back and look at this,
Yeah.
but is the consensus
Have to look at
that
it in more
we
detail.
want the opening wider? You want it wider than deeper?
Yes, that's for me anyhow. Yes.
I don't know. There's some cool projects that have. Sorry. Go ahead.
I agree with Ozma. I don't know that it,
I'm not sure about it.
There's some cool projects that have really deep, narrow courtyards, but it's cool. It like works with the design.
you know, my apartment building on 110th Street, David, in Manhattan had a very long, very deep and very narrow entry court that worked pretty well, actually. It's like 75 feet by 20 feet.
And also, I just wonder if, I mean, Chris, you can correct us, but I think the motivator is privacy and, right? I mean, some of the reasons why we're doing this here for entries. So maybe that's something to think about in our next discussion.
Yeah, and I think another motivator here or a thought behind it, and I need to check back in with kind of the rest of the document, is that the frontage court, it does not subtract from like the amount of building that needs to be up to the build to line, because it's creating a semi-public space that is engaging the street in a positive way and creating visual interest and kind of, still holding the building edge without the form of the building necessarily holding that edge. So there's a few different sections in the objective standards. I would have to go back and kind of think of their relationship to one another.
Yeah, and Chris, if we're talking about the build to line and just the graphic that I'm seeing would not meet my test of the build to line. So if we want to change that, we just need to write it out very specifically, because I would have said this doesn't meet the build to line.
Yeah, I think you need some definitions in here then of what these things are. It's not entirely clear.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go back and rethink that.
Okay, can we ask you to draft through that a little bit? So to the board, I'd like to take a 5-minute break. I also wanted to finish this up by noon. We've got a couple of other things still to go over. So can we do a quick break right now?
Sounds great.
Okay, 5 minutes, everybody. So it's 11:09, so 11:14. Thank you.
Sounds
Thanks.
good.
Okay, so we're back in session. We're going to go into open space. Staff or Jean, could you present your intent on this one, please?
Yes. So just to be clear, open space is regulated in 2 places in the code. The amount of open space that's required for a residential project is regulated in the individual district regulations. And there are a few things that we pulled out and put into this draft section of code that relate to the design of usable open space. So I just want to make that part clear. So the intent here is to provide various recreational opportunities, promote a healthy environment, and enhance the experience of living in Palo Alto. And so this section describes both common and private open spaces and talks about integration into the site access and building circulation, providing generous dimensions for usable open space, landscape elements that support plant growth in terms of soil depth, promote public health, located easily accessible to both private and common areas of buildings, and promote sustainable practices and community safety through eyes on the street. So our first section is private open space, and then we'll talk about common open space.
Anybody have comments about these intentions before we go into the specifics? I'm fine with them. Okay, let's dive into private open space then, Jean.
Okay, and here I should note that we do have one new standard. We had if you're looking at your version, let me pull that out a little bit. Your version of the staff report, item 3 was highlighted in yellow, and we now have a new standard there.
Yes, that was okay.
I think that makes sense.
Anybody have comments about the private open space requirements? I had noted to myself clear height of 8 feet, not 8 feet 6. I'm wondering if a minimum dimension of a circle, not a square, allows more design flexibility. These are pretty small points. Anybody else have anything?
I would support the circle comment.
Sometimes if you have a dog leg and a patio or something, the circle can be an easier way to prove that you have sufficient area. Any other feedback on that? Can we just direct staff? Can you guys try to come up with a less geometrically restrictive minimum area? Does that seem reasonable?
Okay.
And this is private open space. We're okay with the 6-foot depth.
Yes, I think 6 feet is a good dimension at a minimum.
Okay.
Is there
just
anybody
the
else on the
diameter
board?
rather than the square?
Well, yeah, I can just see.
Or 6 feet in any direction.
So should be able to fit a 6-foot diameter.
No, I think 6 foot depth is important. You know, from 6 feet from the wall of the building to the exterior plane. If you say 6 foot in any dimension, you could have some really weird spaces. But a 6 foot diameter circle or about that leaves a lot of flexibility, but still requires the 6 foot.
So we're saying the space should be
Okay.
able to fit the circle in it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's also a common standard.
Peter,
Go ahead.
I have a general comment if we're done with the 6 foot
Yes, go ahead.
dimension. So it's a general comment about where open space is required.
Okay.
So there are a lot of planned community projects that don't have private open space. So say like 725 Alma, 801 Alma, 488 Charleston, Wilton Court. And I guess so my question is, are we trying to, with this code, are we trying to, with these standards, are we trying to get that type of project to fit within the objective standards? Are we just saying that those could still use the planned home community process with the council, and that they could exclude the open space through that process?
So that's the distinction, and let me be more clear about my preface remarks, that the district regulations regulate the amount of usable open space that's required in a project or in a specific district. And so in the case of the PC, the Planned Community District, there may not be an open space requirement. So in that case, that project may be exempt from that requirement, and therefore this would not apply. However, if usable open space if private open space is being provided in a project, including in a PC zone, these regulations would apply.
Okay, so
Yeah, thanks. I mean,
go ahead, Alex.
As well. Yeah, I think that's my understanding as well. And I guess I'm just throwing out there, if we're trying to capture a wider net of projects, then I think that this would be an issue for some of the nonprofit housing developers.
Are you suggesting?
So, yeah, I mean,
Wait. Sorry, can I get a little bit more clarification? So are you saying that those projects don't have private open spaces for each unit?
yes, that's correct. So they have common open space, but they don't have private open space. And that's been an issue, you know, with the council on occasion, with some of the council members feel very strongly about the private open space, have voted no against on projects because they private open space. But I'm just saying that we do have quite a number of projects in town that don't have it.
Interesting.
And so maybe what we can better do is show you the code itself as well. I mean, I'm looking at the multifamily districts that do require 50 square feet of private open space. And so then they would adhere to these objective standards as well.
Yeah, I want
And I
to
was
see other code language that does stipulate private open space per unit, certain square footage for affordable housing and for multifamily. Otherwise,
Right, the RM districts require private open space, but I believe the commercial mixed-use districts allow you to provide any combination of private or common. And so the projects that Board Member Liu may be referring to chose to do common for whatever reason.
If I can ask, and Alex, I thought that this would not apply to affordable housing because of the private open space requirement would be trumped by an overall open space requirement that might be connected to direct funding for an affordable housing project. So that's why I didn't mark it up for affordable housing at all. Am I mistaken? I understand that affordable housing will come in as a PC, but I understood that this would not apply to 100% affordable or 50% plus.
It just depends what zone the project is in. So in the commercial zones, the requirement for open space is 150 square feet. And there is a footnote that, you know, that 150 square feet per unit can be provided either as private or common or, you know, whatever combination.
Okay, thank you, Jody. So in that case, I'm with Alex. This would be a real challenge for an affordable housing project to comply with these dimensions.
Well, they wouldn't have to, if it's in a commercial zone, they could provide 0 private open space.
Okay.
But they'd have to have that much more common.
So what I'm understanding, Jody, is the option is for many of these projects, given our zoning, for an affordable housing developer to choose the common open space per the zoning requirement.
So I think this, oh, sorry. I'll let
If
Debbie-
they're in a commercial zone, they have options for how to provide the open space.
So I think we're
I
providing
think,
provisions.
yeah, I think what might be missing from this standard and causing confusion is it should just say, if private open spaces are provided, they shall meet the following standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you don't,
I don't know that that's necessary to write. I think that was my understanding as well, that if per the other code provisions, if the project chooses to provide private space to these units, we're not saying how many or whatever. We're just saying a minimum of, like, if you are giving people balconies, these are the requirements. And if you are not, then we have other requirements for common space in terms of size.
Yeah, and I'm not seeing an open space requirement in the PC section of the code.
Alex, are you suggesting?
Right, and I think,
Go ahead.
no, I'm just saying, I'm just pointing out that there isn't a requirement in the PC zone. And it seems to me that the overall intent of the state requirement is to get these affordable housing projects in under the objective standards. So, and then if we are requiring it, then it would be a problem in an RM zone, right? It would not. It seems to be there are workarounds in the commercial zones, and that we should just be cognizant of what we're doing here on this particular item, because to me that's the big issue on this particular item.
But Alex, I don't
and
think this item is requiring it though, right? It's just saying that if it is required through other means, then this is what the direction is.
But I'm saying that there's still the bigger issue, the bigger discussion is the intent of the state's requirement, right? That the state is trying to get these projects that have been going through, these long, you might go through like a 3-year peace plan community process. The state is hoping that we can go through an expedited process, objective standards, and I think that I'm saying is that this would cause a big hiccup for an affordable housing developer because
Only
they generally don't.
Only in
an
multifamily
RM zone.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that we understand that. I'm not necessarily arguing to change anything, but I think we just have to, we should throw that out there for discussion.
And part of Gene's larger project is to look at the code in its entirety. And so that's something that we can think a little bit more about.
That's what I'm hearing Alex suggest, really, is that maybe we should be requiring what the open space is for some of these projects in this standard.
Sure. And then I would just do want to say that the reason why that the affordable housing developers some of them don't like to do the private balconies is that they can't manage and maintain them well. So that's the reason why they don't like to do it. Some of them. Others like to do include them. And just for staff, we have the AS overlay zone for housing projects on Stanford Research Park property. And that AS zone does not require private common open space. The projects that have been built haven't actually included it, but it's not required. Pay attention to that one too. Again, that's like commercial zoning with the residential overlay.
I'll look at the Stanford AS zone that you're talking about. I think we might have built all those areas, but, and then I was looking at the AH combining district. That's a combining district that goes with the commercial zone. So, okay, so that wouldn't work. But I was just thinking if maybe we attack it that way. But I think I understand the concern, and so I'll go back and talk to Jean and Chris about how to address that.
I still don't understand the concern, but maybe I'm the only
Well,
one.
just in multifamily, when you have to do the 50 square feet of private open space, and affordable housing may not want to do that 50 square feet of private open space for, you know, a variety of reasons. Do we want to give them some more leeway?
I think it would be very important to address that head on. And thank you, Alex, for bringing that to attention. For some reason, I just didn't see this in a situation for multifamily where affordable housing would be a proposal.
But I do think there are other code provisions that stipulate whether affordable housing is required to have open space or not. And I don't know that that's the intent for these guidelines. I mean, these are about aesthetics. They're not about counts as much or requirements. So, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if an affordable housing developer finds somewhere in the code that he's not required to have as much open space or something, he doesn't have to look at this code section.
That's correct. But yeah, we're just looking, there's the rest of the code that we're not seeing right now. And I think that's where Alex's comment is going to, is maybe not to this piece, but to the rest of the larger code.
Jody, can you report back to us next time we look at this, what the actual implications are of private open space on affordable housing projects in residential RM zones? I think Alex is a very legitimate point. We want to be sure we've consciously decided on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just can say that RM properties have to have 50 square feet of private open space, and that may or may not work for affordable housing. And so we'll see if there's.
Well, let me get a straw poll with the board. And would we support putting in this regulation an elimination of that for an affordable housing project that is not required?
Yeah, I don't know that it would go here. I think it would go into the code itself. But I still would love the straw poll.
I would support that. I think affordable housing is very important, and the balcony requirement can be a big limitation.
I do not support that. I think the balconies, I think developers can find a way to put the balconies, and that open space is critical to the enjoyment of living there.
Okay.
And for reference, I've been working with a nonprofit co-op affordable housing community, and the issue of balconies got brought up a lot in our outreach shareholder meetings, and especially in the pandemic, everybody was saying that the only saving grace they have is to go out on their balcony and feel safe and be outside, especially in the early lockdown, like from March to June. I think just because a developer doesn't want to pay for it doesn't mean that we should compromise the living quality of the people that live there.
Well put, Ozma. The rest of the board, chime in on this one, please.
Definitely with Peter. I'm with you. And I do not think this should be a requirement for affordable housing. Do not want to inhibit in any way the review and approval and building of housing with this requirement.
Thank you, Grace. David and Alex. Don't all speak at once here.
I think David might not know he's not on mute.
Alex, what's your thought?
Yeah, you know, I'm very torn with this one. I think the open space is really important. Part of it, open space is really important. But I don't want to, I don't want to prevent units from being built if the balcony is an issue. I think this just needs more outreach and debate before I weigh in on this one.
Okay, well, I don't think we're going to have the last word on this topic. My guess is this is the kind of thing that goes to city council. But they certainly would value our opinion. Does anybody else have anything to add on this? Is David still with us?
I think he's on mute. David, you're on mute.
Can't get out of it.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. I agree with Ozma in part, but I think it's a balancing act. If a project can afford more open space on the ground for everybody or on a rooftop, then individual balconies are not so significant. But so I feel it's kind of a trade-off. But open space, general open space for all residents is another aspect to this. Certainly public housing or affordable housing ought to have a certain amount of outdoor space for everybody. But for the reasons Ozma expressed, I think private outdoor space like this is also a good thing and could be used in conjunction with general outdoor space as a requirement.
Okay, why don't we leave you in Ozma's column on that one? So Jody gets a real split vote for herself.
Yeah.
And then common open space. Any questions or comments about that? Minimum dimension of 12 feet, for example. What do we think?
That enough for social distancing?
It's a good point. Maybe you should take that into account. It needs to be bigger now.
And I just want to add, if you're looking at the screen, this was a place where staff reviewed the open space draft standards and recommended a change to that first item. So instead of a minimum dimension of 12 feet, the recommendation is that it's a minimum size of 200 square feet and minimum dimension of 10 feet.
That's
Are we
fine.
risking long, narrow spaces with that potentially? Like what if, I don't know.
Yeah, why not leave it 12 feet? Was there a rationale for the change?
If it wasn't Jody, it might have been Amy, and I don't know if she's on the phone.
Yeah, I'm not remembering on this one. I mean, I think common open space needs to have a minimum size. You know, as far as the dimensions, I mean, do we want to do the circle idea again, or?
I think that might be a good idea, just because I was just thinking, like, what if someone has, you know, 100-foot length, and then they're meeting that 10 feet with that 100-foot length, and then they just offset 2 feet for like a planter box or something. Say they have 200 feet of open space.
You're saying you think 12 feet is the right dimension, Ozma, the minimum?
No, I'm just saying the way that it's written is that it could lend itself to unusable spaces.
So what might be needed here is like an ultimate minimum dimension to be considered common open space, but potentially a requirement that there's at least one minimum size circle like that can fit into the common open space that I would argue would be much greater than 12 feet. And the minimum dimension is more about like how big a space needs to be in like a dog leg to, or a flag shaped open space to consider the pole of the flag part of the open space.
Well, a 16-foot diameter circle gives you, I think, approximately 200 square feet. But that might be restrictive. 16 feet's a big dimension for a building.
I would say we can keep, you know, I mean, we have the 6-foot diameter square or circle for the private. Maybe we have it a little bit bigger, like an 8-foot or a 10-foot diameter, and call it a day.
I don't have strong feelings about this.
Does the open space have any relationship to the number of units in the building?
Sure, in the code it does, yes. That's how it's determined, how much you need.
Let's speed up on this. It's 11:40.
Does anybody else have any other comments on open space? Okay, then we had the section on rooftop open space. Is that something we want to discuss? It's been a hot button issue around Palo Alto.
And on the rooftop open space, I just want to mention this is an existing code section that currently lives in the CDC district and in the CN district. And so we pulled it out of the district regulations and put it here.
Okay, so it's been done. This is what's done then.
That's under little b.
Okay.
And then under little a are a series of, as a cross-reference to a section that the ARB discussed maybe 2 years ago about specific standards for rooftop gardens.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it as it is right now. It is to the code. That's good.
Sorry, Peter, can I just add one thing on the BI and UIs? I assume that percentage of the required usable open space, 75 and 60, that would be revisited if we're talking about an affordable project to move in that's being proposed for any of those sites.
Yeah.
Jody and crew, is that the case?
I think
I would say yes, since frankly, because now this is, if this moves to this section of the code, a developer could, instead of meeting this specific standard, could meet the intent statement. And so then the ARB would find that the development has met the intent statement.
I guess this is for our further discussion, just to make sure that we're safeguarding affordable projects and we're all agreed in terms of open space requirements.
I had noted for myself when reviewing these standards that I didn't see anything about landscaping or privacy in here. Am I missing something, or is that something that's not necessary?
So if you're looking at the packet, maybe let me just stop this share for a minute. So at the end of open space, we're next going to talk about materials. And then we propose to move 2 existing subsections into this section of the code. And so right now there are visual screening and landscaping standards in, oh, this is the wrong code reference, but I think it's 18.40, and there are lighting standards. And so those standards would move into this section of code. And so that's why it's not otherwise discussed.
Okay, and so are we still waiting for a draft of these things from you?
Well, those right now have not been proposed to change.
Okay.
But we can provide reference to them.
Okay. Any comments from the board then on these topics?
So in the next version, would we see a copy of those standards here? Or is it just a reference to, like, are we expected to go to the other section to look at that?
Yeah, I think we can make sure and add them, but if you're wanting to get ahead of the game, they are in the code section right now. If we move them to here, we are actually giving people more flexibility because, you know, a streamlined project could meet the objective standard and go through, or if they wanted to do something different, they could go to the ARB. Whereas right now, they are required to meet that code section.
You're saying the material section's already in the code?
No, sorry, I'm talking about visual and lighting.
Okay, that's fine. How about the materials section then? What are we doing about that?
So let's move on to that page. So you may recall when we spoke in February, the board had a lot of different opinions on how or if we should regulate materials, including there were concerns about over-regulating materials, particularly for affordable housing. So this is an example that Chris has done for another community. And this is an effort to, instead of, it's really setting up materials that are allowed as primary materials or secondary materials or accent materials, or materials that are completely prohibited, such as vinyl siding, chain link fencing. And so this is more of a, rather than prescriptive set of standards, it's sort of more of a formula that the board could review when reviewing a project, or staff could review when reviewing a project.
And what was our, back in February, what was our reaction? Just refresh my memory, please.
Well, there were concerns about being too prescriptive or requiring materials that may be too expensive, particularly for below market rate housing.
Okay, to my colleagues on the board, what do we feel about something like this? Is this appropriate, necessary, overkill?
I think it's a good idea. I noticed that vinyl siding is in this list. Will that be eliminated? But I think that otherwise it's very all-encompassing and the good.
Well, vinyl siding is prohibited on this list.
No.
Right, so the legend up here is PSAN, primary, secondary, accent, and prohibited. Oops.
Oh, okay, fine. I missed that.
Oh,
So the ends at the bottom of the page, and this again, this is an example from another community, but the ends on the bottom of the page are showing prohibited materials: T111 plywood, vinyl siding, vinyl fencing, chain link fencing. You know, the decision making about stucco is important, whether stucco can be a primary material. Obviously, we see many buildings where stucco is a primary material and not just a secondary material.
Do we have
Likewise, cement siding.
do we have something like hardy board on here somewhere?
Well, it should be like a fiber reinforced
Oh,
cement.
there we go.
Well,
David just spoke up. How about the rest of us? What do we think?
I'm not sure why it's a secondary material. I mean, the selection of the S and the P is a question here.
Just the question now is if we should have them produce something like this for us.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they should. Yeah.
Osma's in favor of it. David's in favor of it. Grace and Alex, what do you think?
I think it's great. I had a question on design standard S1C, but you know, we can talk about it later. This is a great direction.
Okay, Alex, are you in favor of this?
I am in favor of it. I do have some comments. One is, you know, there are lots of new materials. So like we have like the wood-like materials that are made with plastic and aluminum. We also have, there's sort of a new category of materials called prismatic metals. You'll see some on San Antonio Road in Mountain View. And that we have to figure out a way. I think there's a line in here that says you can have something approved by the Planning Commission in there. And I think we do need something like that for all the other materials that we don't even know about.
Yeah.
You know, that are all the future things in the future. I think that's very important.
Could you leave a category here for new materials to be approved by the Architecture Review Board can be put on the list?
Yes.
Okay, I support this as well. So why don't we get you guys to put this together for our package here?
Okay.
If we could.
Then one other.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. Yeah. One last comment on metals.
Yes.
Because this has come up. This has come up before, like on the Junior Museum, Castellea, and stuff. Is that there are and the fire station, that they're different grades of how they're painted. And I think that's really important because that we should try to distinguish that in here because they do fade a lot. They get a lot of chalkiness on the surface. For example, like there's a CVS in Midtown which has a red metal roof, and it faded to pink, and we had all the neighbors who were complaining about the pink roof. So I think we should try to, as best as we can, to try to address the quality issues in there. Like there are different grades of paint for the metal. And it's kind of picky, but I think we should try to do it. So don't just say like corrugated metal, but let's include the specification.
So Alex, is there
Of the
sometimes,
paint.
I know on roof material, there's usually like a warranty period, and sometimes we'll regulate
Yeah.
based on the warranty period. So is that the same with paint?
I think we could probably do it that way. Because basically on the cheaper paints, they have a very short warranty. So that might be the way to do it. And then there's a comment, the one line in there about ceramic tile. And there's like a million porcelain tiles out there, and some of them are good and some of them are awful. And I don't know how we regulate that. I think maybe as you have it, saying that it's only a secondary material is probably maybe the easiest way to address it. But that's potentially I think that's potentially a big for a project.
Okay, this is the kind of detail that will benefit tremendously from us reviewing it offline when staff provides us with the initial list. So if I could ask everybody when we do get that list, next time we look at this, to really focus in on these kind of things. What's the best way to regulate painting on metal finishes, for example? What I'd like to do before we finish this topic is discuss the graphics and what we can do about it. What I'd like to suggest is that we ask our subcommittee working on these objective standards to take an active role to work with the consultants to come up with graphics that more accurately result what we do in town here in Palo Alto. So maybe we can all chime in if we think that's an appropriate thing to do, and maybe one or two comments on the graphics. Is that okay? It's really important to present this carefully. It's really tripped us up some, and I think the public will have an even harder time with it.
Is it okay if the board, so like I've actually made some sketches or some edits to some graphics that I could share with Jean and Chris during our subcommittee meeting, but if the other three members of the board have something like that to share with us, is that okay to send those to us so we can share it with Jean and Chris as part of coordination?
If you send them to Jody, she can decide the best way to get them to you as a subcommittee member. But you shouldn't go directly to your colleagues, Osma, I don't think. Is that right, Jody?
Yeah, it would be best if I collect everything.
Okay.
But are we in agreement that perhaps we can have our subcommittee go back to the consultants and see if we can just come up with a better way to do this? Or improve graphics a little bit?
And I really thank the subcommittee for your extra work.
David, are you on board with that? You're on the subcommittee, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think we should give thought to how those graphics work, and maybe compare them with other graphics that are already in the code. Pretty good. But I want to go, if I might just take a moment to go back to the materials. Isn't it possible to put some regulation in the design standards that would answer what Alex was mentioning under S1? on that page, the one that's up right presently on the board. Jean, Chris?
The example of the materials is from Beaverton. We will change this for Palo Alto. It was just an example. I would really like to hear everyone's comments on the graphics before we conclude today. That is important for us moving forward.
No, I'm fine with doing that. I'm just referring this to you to look at.
Okay, David, I didn't understand your comment about materials, but do you have something you want to add to this?
I think that some of the issues of the quality of materials should be addressed in design standards on that page, the way it was shown there. We haven't discussed that piece of that presentation.
Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, we agree that we need high quality materials. And I think we'll look at what, if we can work off of like warranty numbers, something that's objective, then we'll try and put that in the next draft. I mean, this section is very drafty. And so we just need to we can stay at a high level right this minute, and we'll have another round to speak about more specifics.
Fine.
So let's do a round of comments on the graphics that we've been presented so far, just to give them as much feedback as possible. My biggest critical comment is that a lot of these buildings are things you just wouldn't see in Palo Alto, the 5- and 6-story boxy apartment buildings. And so I think it's just more important to have buildings that are closer to what's in our community. That's my single biggest issue. Who else wants to chime in on this?
I'll say I'm actually fine with the graphics. The only worry is that, and I think Planning Commission was worried too, is if you have just those examples get a lot of scrutiny, and then the worry is that is the example. So if there's a way to present it that here's one example, or if there's a way to provide graphics that are different, for example, photos and diagrams. And perhaps there are photos, and sorry, Peter, but I feel like maybe there's a need to actually look outside of our community and within our community of different architectural styles. And sometimes when I've worked with cities, there are just photos of built examples in that city. And that's okay with me too. I think that it's just hard sometimes when there's just one example and then an applicant is going to follow that to the T, or have some misconception that that is exactly how it should be done. It's not an easy task. Thank you so much for trying to do this. Having said that, I think graphics are very important. I think we should have graphics in this document. Absolutely.
That's good feedback, Grace. Who else has something to say about the graphics? Alex?
But we can go Alex, and then I can go after.
You were ready to speak, Osman. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, I do think so for example, like on the next slide, where we have, we're talking about facade, or was it the next slide? It was the one that had the 4 with, yeah, this one. Like something that could help is just in terms of like cropping all of that stuff out. Like if we're talking about facade, we don't need to see what the rest of the building looks like. And I feel like if you look at the proportions, you know, like this roof is taking up so much of it, and automatically your brain starts going to like, there's no elevator penthouse, and it just starts going to places it shouldn't be going. So at least when you're talking about the thing itself, I might recommend really being strategic with the crop, and just kind of showing, you know, kind of just the item that you're talking about. And I mean, I think the graphics are coming along. I like the general styles. The massing ones that we were seeing, the ones that didn't have the articulation, concern me a bit, probably because I think it's just kind of showing the roof and stuff. And if it's really about facade, maybe that would solve that problem. And I think also maybe adding, maybe to Grace's point, adding like a bit more, I think we have this tendency to try and be as general as we can. And perhaps the danger of that is now you're encouraging very general architecture, sort of by accident. And so maybe there is some merit, like I think we have there is one graphic, I think, that had those David Baker like window shades that are angled, that have a bit of style to them, and maybe adding a bit of style to these drawings might actually make them a bit more palatable to look at, if that makes sense.
Okay, Alex and David, we haven't heard from you two about the graphics.
Okay, well, I could start by saying that I think that I look back at the graphics in the existing context-based design criteria, and I think that they're very good. That, for example, on one of the pages, one of the figures, it does exactly what Ozma is talking about, and only shows a facade where there's a facade and eliminates a lot of the roof. So take a look, Chris, at the way in which those graphics are presented. There are sections through the building that show the commercial and the residential above that could well be defined with dimensions on them. The recesses are shown, and then the roof lines are not in some cases. And when they're in massing drawings, they're shown just as simple massing drawings with recesses, et cetera, on the rooftop setbacks. They're, in my mind, they're much less specific, but more appropriate. So have a look. For example, here again, there's another one that has recesses in the building in the fronts, consistently along a series of them. And there it's important because the front and the back of the building are treated the same way. So the diagram is very good. And also, I note that in a lot of cases, we're showing street lines as if there's a border, a specific border, and we're on a corner. I don't think you should really be showing the street. A lot of these drawings put the building into a block without defining it as being at a corner. So have a look at these drawings, because the ones that have been produced here for years in the present zoning are quite good.
Why, thank you, David. I did a lot of them.
I was gonna say.
We'll get back to it then.
Alex Liu, do you have any comments about the graphics?
I don't have any comments.
Okay, so Jody and staff, have you gotten enough feedback from us for this study session now on draft objective standards?
I'll let Jean and Chris respond.
I do have, sorry, can I say one comment before we close this item?
Of course you can, Ozma.
I just want to address our discussion around affordable housing just briefly. There is precedent in other past affordable housing projects of the past where they have not been built to the same architectural standard as market rate housing, and they have failed as a result. And I think it's incumbent upon us when we're creating these design guidelines to ensure the success of the design of these buildings. And so I know there's concern about, rumors. I recently had a good conversation with Habitat for Humanity about one of their affordable housing projects, and they wanted to keep the balconies because they felt like it worked for the design. They felt their project would be more successful that way. And they were willing to make the design work, cut back on other things so that this could happen. And I would like us to really just focus and make sure that we all want affordable housing, but we want it to be successful, and we need to create design standards that ensure that success. and not try to cut corners where we think they might need to get cut because we feel like it won't happen, because the success is more important, I think.
I can tell you, Ozma, that I'm listening hard to what you're saying. I'm not saying you're convincing me, but I hear you very loud and clear.
And Peter, if I may, just on this whole process, I just want to thank staff, but also, are we going to hear about the process moving forward in terms of how we talk to stakeholders like affordable housing developers and architects and people who have built, on projects? Are we going to reach out to them?
I thought that we had sort of covered that ground and realized that we were not going to do anything else. But Jody, why don't you tell us what you think? I mean, this is a public hearing process, Grace, and it's completely open and advertised, and we're under a real tight time constraint at the same time.
There's a
So
draft that's online to look at this besides our meetings, and so I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, like I said, every project has a website where people can see all the details. I'm happy to take a sort of second look at it and see if we have can we do an email blast or something of that sort. But so I just don't have a specific answer right this minute, but we'll look into it.
Thank you so much.
Grace, do you have access through your work perhaps with a group of Palo Alto architects? You could take the lead.
Well,
on
that's what I
putting.
was just going to do. I mean, if that's comfortable for everybody. I mean,
I wonder if you
cover more ground, right? To just reach out.
If you could take the lead to work through Jody to get her to put out an email blast. I think our board would support doing that. And maybe Jody, if you want us to collectively agree, that's a good idea.
Okay.
That gives you cover. I support doing that. Ozma, Alex, and David, do you support?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Should we try to reach out to other entities like Habitat for Humanity and other kind of people that might have good insight?
That's a good idea. Yeah. So you should then, well, I guess Grace is going to get Jody the primary information, but any other help you can give her to reach out, that'd be good. Okay, anything else on this subject?
Maybe if there's a list that could be shared, maybe we can help add to the list in terms of distribution.
Well, you got to go through Jody. So, okay, Chris, have you got the feedback from us? Yes, okay.
I have to jump
Yeah.
off. Board member Chair Balte.
Can you hold on 1 second, Osmo? We had 2 items left. Can we push off the ex parte communications discussion till next time, Jody?
Yeah, I mean, that's up to you. That's fine. Actually, let me make sure I let the attorney go.
Oh dear, has he been sitting in on all this the whole time?
No. He just came in, half hour ago or something. So, we want to push off, sorry, let me get to my agenda. So we want to push off ex parte.
Well, does anybody else have an issue with doing that? I think that can wait. Okay, we're going to push ex parte off till next meeting. And then the last thing is I would just like to get some feedback on our upcoming letter to council. Osma, you can sign off if you don't want to partake in that.
Yeah, I really got to go.
Very
Thanks,
much.
guys.
Thanks for your help, Osma. So to the remaining board members, the last study session thing was that I would like to draft a letter to council, an annual report of the architecture review process. This will be the second year we've done that in a row. I'd like to establish a precedent where the outgoing chair takes feedback from the board right now at one meeting, then drafts a letter of what it might be and circulates it through Jody for feedback and hopefully approval by the whole board in the next meeting, or certainly by the end of the year. I think that's a good policy if we can get that going year after year with our board. And so I'm willing to start that this year. What I'd like to do is just get a round of feedback from everybody of what items, not everything, but a couple of things you might think are really important that the ARB has observed through our work that I think the council should hear. So if anybody has any feedback, I'd like to hear that so I can incorporate that in our letter.
Yeah, and Peter, before we get too far away, I'm sorry to go back on the agenda a little bit, but we do need an actual motion to continue the ex parte communications.
Oh, okay. I move that we continue the ex parte communication study session to our next meeting, or should I say a date uncertain?
Next meeting is good.
To our next meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Roll call vote, please, Vin.
Chair Balte,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
and Thompson just left, so motion passes 4 with Vice Chair Thompson absent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're now discussing our study session for the annual letter to council. So I'm eager to hear people's input, or if there's a different process that somebody thinks we should follow instead, I'd like to hear that too. And we should be aware that the letter is something that's in our bylaws that we're required to present every year to the council and planning commission. So this is just something we want to do. I'm inclined to include, I can start this off by giving ourselves a pat in the back in a sense. When I went out to the Marriott Hotel the other day, looking at the signage stuff, I was really pleased with how it's coming out. I think our input on that process has made an enormous difference on how it fits in and how it looks. It's a much more handsome building than I thought it would be. And I think that's a large part because we pushed so hard on getting it to step back and worked on the massing of it. And I'd like to say that to council, that I think in that case, at least, the architecture review process was productive. Okay, anybody else have anything they'd like us to put in this letter? What's things to tell council?
The council at the last meeting, looking at and approving the recent San Antonio Road project, commented on how much we had improved it and gave us a pat on the back.
Yes, board member, there was a comment to that effect. What are some other things we've observed that we want to just mention to council?
Oh, I was wondering, and maybe it's not appropriate, are you going to be speaking with them before at the end of 2020 then? Or in this letter we would be sending it before the end of this calendar year?
Yeah, my goal is that we should be sending this at the end of this calendar year, sort of at the end of this cycle of the board. We now have new board members coming on, a new leadership,
I think
new
it's
cycle.
a great idea. I just wanted to suggest that, since the council priorities have for 2020 been housing and sustainability and mobility, is there a way to showcase or highlight some of the projects where we feel like this board has made an impact? And maybe that's just a way to structure the letter. And then the other piece that I wanted to just ask or consider is just how we work with council. If there has been and I'm not sure, but it sounds like chair and vice chair meet regularly with somebody on the council in terms of regular contact. And if we as a board feel like, there should be maybe some kind of city council liaison. I know that's not offered right now to boards, but is there a way to be more aware of or more communication with council at important junctures during the year? Or maybe that's already occurred. I'm sorry, I came in late.
Well, there's not a whole lot of that takes place. And the little contact I have with council is when I reach out to them on a case-by-case basis. We have a lot of contact with the staff.
Yeah, I mean, how you feel, I thought maybe, I don't know if that's something that the chair would like to do, but maybe that's a way to be more connected to council throughout the year.
I've always had the idea that the chair or somebody appointed by the chair should attend council meetings whenever we have anything that references the work of our board. We could try to formalize that and get them to accept that they want that. That's just a way of communicating. What I've always found is the council seems to have so many different agendas and items going on that I hate to impose like, hey, our thing is so important, you have to listen to us.
Yeah, and I just want to say, just from these past meetings, wonderful that, Alex has been part of the North Ventura and then he's able to report back, but maybe there's some mechanism where something like that could happen, where it's more communal efforts. And I don't know if that goes with Planning Commission too, or HRB, but just in terms of the boards that deal with environment. physical environment and some of these council priorities. I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay, I'm going to make a note of it. I'll put a paragraph in there and we can debate it as it's written up. Any other thoughts on that? Any other thoughts from great Alex or David? For example, we could bring up this, we just had a discussion today whether outdoor balconies on affordable housing is a good idea or a bad idea. And we can bring that up to council. My guess is that they're not quite as connected on both sides of that story. And that's the kind of thing that we see in the trenches, so to speak, both sides of it. And council likes to hear our opinion on these things. And even if they're going to make the decision, it might be really good to give them our feedback. Is that something we want to tackle? It's a big topic.
I think on that specific topic, we're split and there hasn't been a lot of discussion or input from stakeholders to educate us on, where we stand as a group. That's my feeling.
On that particular one, we're split, yes, but even just showing them what the issues are sometimes is useful. But I agree, on that one, we don't have a clear direction. Is there other things like that?
I think of course, I'd like to see us show the successful projects that we, again, from beginning to end. I think that's always what they're going to be most interested in. When we go beyond that, I think like last year, one of our major comments was the street widths and the delivery issues, and I don't know if that really resonated with the council very much. We considered it, but it's a transportation issue, and I don't know if it's a priority for them. So I guess I'm more inclined to make it a more visual. And it turned out that they were asking us then specific questions at the end of our presentation. Questions that they were interested in the process and how it's been working. It'd be better if we were a little better prepared for some of those questions, if we knew what the questions might be. If we had specific answers, then I guess we have to be ad hoc on that and just do it as best we can. Last year, I noted we spent a lot of time on planting trees over the extension of buildings as a problem. It interested them, I'll admit, it interested them. So we should maybe look to see what other issues are like that would be of interest. But my opinion is we should concentrate more on our successes, and that's what they would be most interested in.
Okay. The issue with the depth for planting trees over garages is a big one, and I think that was well received in the sense that it's a rather technical, complicated thing, but we've noticed it consistently affecting larger elements, and we put it out to the council so they can see that.
Yes, I know. I would say ambiguous.
At the meeting the other night for the San Antonio apartment building that was just approved, the council approved the individual building fairly readily, a 7-0 vote, but they split right down the middle on whether they should extend the same zoning parameters to the rest of the neighborhood. Last year, we mentioned to them that the San Antonio corridor could really use its own set of design guidelines or some standard as they try to develop that from 1-story light industrial to 4-5-story FAR 2.0 residential. Do we still feel that? Just for example, another thing.
You know, it seems to me that when we're talking about those street issues like that, what we're going to get is a lot of different looking buildings happening on the street. I wonder what other board members feel about that, because the one we just approved is a very bold, strong, kind of a specific design personality. What will the next one be like? Will we have a street that is made up of all bold design? The hotel itself is, as you say, it's a nice design. And then what appears next to it? How will that street be by the time the next 10 years pass? And other buildings have similar old design.
Well, the question right now is, should we put that in our annual statement to council, that this is something they might want to think about, or at least something that we've noticed is something that might be an issue? Okay, I don't have a whole lot of feedback from you folks. Shall I just wrap something up and circulate it then?
Yes, let's start.
We'll work it out, but I hate to write a bunch of stuff and then have nobody want to support it.
And Peter, related to San Antonio guidelines, council did direct us to come back with a corridor survey or study, I should say, but that's more related to the street or the public improvements themselves, not necessarily the land use and the design. But our objective standards that we were just working on are going to play in, are going to be applied to those projects, could be applied to those projects. And we haven't maybe talked about it as much, but we could have specific standards for specific areas if we want to add that to the objective standards somehow.
I intend to put it in the draft of this letter that the city might be well served by having a design standard for the San Antonio corridor. But I want to see if we get the board behind that. And it's a big process, and then the council has to decide it's important enough to get the resources to go forward on that. So this is just the first step, sort of, hey, this is an issue. David brought up with strong feelings the whole idea that this objective design thing is just not worth doing. Ultimately, we shouldn't have these standards. We should just stick to the architecture review. This letter to council is a good place to put that. If that's really how we feel as a board, we say it here and tell them our piece, and they can decide how to behave accordingly or take it accordingly. So is that something we should put in this letter?
I think I was voted down 4-1.
Well, the letter is the proper format for that, David. I mean, if we have an issue with how the politicians are managing design review, that's where you tell them. So.
Yeah, I think the only trouble with this one is that it's a state mandate. And I think where we have the most control is, how big or small are we making the box for objective standards?
What I heard David saying is it's incumbent upon us to fight these things. So even at the state level, the city should be fighting it. And that's it.
As long as we're fighting and doing the work at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's what I tried to do, is get us to do the work today. But the decision to fight those things, David, is a city council decision, certainly, not us.
Not ours, yeah.
And so, but look, they want to know from us, what do we think about things? This is the opportunity to put it out there.
That's a likely question that will come back to us. That's the council meeting.
Oh, I think it's a very valid question. It's not clear to me what the board as a whole thinks about it. We need to speak with one voice on this thing. Okay, enough though. Anybody has any other thoughts? Let's tell them to me and we can go from there.
I wonder if I could add.
I can't hear you, David.
Could I just add to one note on this, and that is that I think it's, I want to commend consultants who are off camera right now. They have done a lot of work. It's a tremendous task, and Jody, I know you coordinate with them and add a tremendous amount of information that they need to continue. But where am I going with this now? The board question is whether or not this is we're going to follow this, is whether or not the code itself is that inadequate the way it's written? I mean, I really think there's an awful lot in our code that's pretty damn good the more I read it. And therefore, I wonder how, has it ever been thought that we look specifically at the code and change the language to make it more appropriate, you know, objectivity? Why is it considered so subjective? Well, that's a philosophical question, maybe. But
Yeah. Look, David, let me draft this thing. There'll be a paragraph about it and then we can work on it from there.
okay,
Okay. I just wanted to collect ideas now. We're going long overdue here. So can we close this study session on annual report to council? Then next item on our agenda is approval of minutes. This is the draft architectural review of minutes for October 15th, 2020. Do we have any comments on those minutes?
I have some corrections on phonetic spellings, and I can send those directly to staff.
What are the corrections, Alex? Are there more than just typographical?
There's phonetic spellings,
Oh, okay.
like Walter Gropius, Corbusier's Unité de Habitation.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Anything else? Can we have a motion then, please?
I move that we.
I will move that we approve the for October 25th.
Okay, so moved and second on that?
Second,
Moved and seconded. Let's have a vote. Staff, can we have a vote, please?
Chair Bolte,
Yes?
Board Member Hirsch,
yes,
Board Member Lee,
Yes,
Board Member Liu,
Alex?
Board Member Liu.
okay.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes 4-0 with Vice Chair Thompson absent.
Thank you very much. Moving along, the next item is board member questions, comments, or announcements. North of Ventura Coordinated Area Plan Working Group Update. Alex?
Sure. So there was, on November 5th, there was a joint meeting with the Parks and Rec Commission to review naturalizing the creek. And on December 9th, the North Ventura will be presented at the Planning Commission. And I think the staff will present the 3 alternative concepts at that meeting.
Okay. Anything else? Is that it?
So I think that's it. I think everyone's alluded to the 788 San Antonio project, which we're very excited to see that get approved. That's actually the first housing incentive program project. And then the council also added the housing incentive program to the 2 blocks of San Antonio. So we will hopefully see more projects along that corridor.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for a long meeting and productive. Okay, have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.